Okay, we're good to go, folks. Thank you all, and welcome to, I'd like to call this meeting to order. It is 10:03 on Friday, May the 1st. Believe it or not, this is, I heard Councillor Zavitz say, our third month now of dealing with COVID. Just for the public watching, this is our electronic meeting being held in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act 2001 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I just want to confirm all those members that are here, and I see Councillor Roberts, I see Councillor Mazan, I see Councillor Bridgman, Councillor Kelley, Councillor Zavitz, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Jaglowitz, Councillor Nishikawa, and Councillor Hayes. Madam Clerk, just to confirm that we are all present and accounted for today, including myself. Thank you. We have no members who are absent. We also have a number of staff who are here. Their videos are turned off, as you can see, but I'm not necessarily going to go through and read them all. I think as you scroll through, or the people who are looking at the screen, virtually every, actually every department is represented, including in here in the office. We have our CAO, Mr. Hammond, and our clerk, Ms. Mortimer, is here. So I also want to acknowledge today that we are on lands here at the Township office and across Ontario that are traditionally occupied by Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples have cared for this territory for the benefit of future generations, and their stewardship throughout the ages is truly recognized as we hold our meetings today. For those members of the public who are turning in and watching us, please understand that this is our second go round, if you will, at our draft 2020 budget. And those people we've had received this week a lot of email requests, but because we are in a online Zoom style meeting, we've asked for questions to be submitted, and if anything is needed further from today's comments, to an email address, tml2020budget, tml2020budget @muskokalakes.ca. So we have had a number of comments prior to the budget that were circulated to council, and we've had a lot of comments over the last 7 days that have also been circulated to council. We're going to move our way through our agenda here. I have to ask council, do we have any declaration of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, clerk is satisfied. Great, we have no invited delegations today. And we have no supplementary agenda. I'm going to try and make sure we're on the right page. We have a couple of items of business that we will work through. Where is my resolution here? First one, I need 2/3 of this because it wasn't circulated that we're going to basically be suspending the rules of procedure. So I need 2/3 of council to agree that we can do that as we go forward. So can I have a raising of hands? I'm just that I haven't called the vote. Do I need to read the resolution to get the 2/3, or I need 2/3 to do it? Oh, I thought 2/3 put it on the floor. Okay, my apologies. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Kelley, seconded by Councillor Mazan, be it resolved that pursuant to Section 232 of Township's Procedural Bylaw 2019-79, the rules of procedure are suspended for the duration of the 2020 budget deliberation, and that they will be reinstated at the conclusion of said discussion. All those in favor? Everyone's hands up. Madam Clerk, everyone's hand is up.
Can't see Ruth.
Councillor Nishikawa's hand. Great, thank you very much. That is carried. Everybody else was there. That's great. Okay. Let me just see where we're going here. Make sure we are good. Again, for those councillors, we did this last week. We have a raise hand feature on Zoom. If you wish to speak, if you could push that little button, and I will work through council in order as we move our way through. And when we do vote, we will be raising our hands to vote so that the public can see us vote accordingly. Okay, let me just, if I can, sort of start in, and we'll try and work our way through. We have a couple of other resolutions later on in the agenda have been brought forward by some councillors, so thank you for that. I think the first thing is it's nice to note, if those people who heard the Premier speak yesterday, certainly the measures that the province has undertaken and that Canada has undertaken to reduce the spread of COVID are being noted. On the 29th in particular of April, was the lowest record new cases, and that was down to 75. The day before, I think, was about 200. There was a little blip in there, about 300 or 400 one day, but the day before that, I think, was 250. So we're certainly tracking on the downward trend. And I think if you also heard the Premier yesterday's comments, we are getting ready, and he wants the public to get ready in business sector to try and get ready to open under a new normal, new COVID protocols. And I think that's a great opportunity for us all here as we move forward. Summer is not lost. I think summer will be different. As Councillor Zavitz has coined the phrase, this will be business as unusual. But I look forward to welcoming our seasonal residents eventually back to Muskoka and uniting all of Muskoka as we move forward. So with that, just a couple of comments for the public. This is our second budget meeting for 2020. As a recap, last week, our staff presented the recommended budget at 4.5% increase. In the words of one of the councillors, it was a meat and potatoes budget with no gravy. But just as a reminder for the public, we also need to understand that our government, our municipalities are fundamentally different oftentimes in private sector, in that we never look at increasing profits, because we typically don't make profit, or we don't need to make more money. We need to try and keep a cap on taxes. With that said, our job is to deliver value for the money. And if we're not delivering the value, the public, well, ultimately, those people around the Zoom meeting probably won't be here in 2.5 years at the next election. So we charge money for taxes, we deliver services, and as a council, it's our job to evaluate the cost value equation. Let's be frank. People generally believe we pay too much, and they also don't get a lot of money or value for their tax dollars. We know this, but people don't fully understand what it is we do and the services of which we provide. We do, each and every one of us need to do a better job of explaining what it is our municipality does and the services we deliver. The other thing to remember is that all of our services are delivered by staff. Based on current COVID times and our staff truly doing double duty, if ever we should acknowledge staff and the hard work they do, now is the time. They're truly the glue that keeps this municipality together, and they're the glue going forward. Personally, I appreciate the job they do and the job they have done in helping us today find additional savings for us to consider. Last week, there was a lot of discussion, and we had several emails from the public asking for us to adjust their capital plans by deferring any project from 2020 to 2021 or even 2022, all believing that this will help us get through 2020 and COVID times. I know that council now gets this, but for the general public watching, any deferral of a capital item for 2020 to any future year has absolutely zero impact on today's budget or the amount of money that we will levy this year. In fact, we could delay every capital item for 1 year and there would be absolutely zero savings to this year taxpayers, because the money we put away to pay for today was saved from many, many years ago. Not to mention, if projects are deferred, the chances of the cost of these projects increasing for next year is greatly enhanced. I think the other thing that the public really needs to understand in all of this is that by deferring any planned capital project, not only are we not saving the taxpayers money today, but by doing so, we are actually adding to the current negative economy as we are stopping work from some of our planned expenditures and ultimately taking money away from eligible workers willing and ready to work today. As we work our way through today, I again want to thank our CAO, Derek Hammond. I also want to thank our Commissioner of Finance at the district, Julie Stevens, and each and every one of our senior staff who have truly gone deep to look at all items. Ultimately, it's going to be our job as council to decide what is appropriate for our 2020 budget. With that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to our CAO, Mr. Hammond, who will take us through some of the work that's been done over the last 7 days. Mr. Hammond.
Thanks, Your Worship. Got a bit of a slideshow here for committee. Before I begin, I want to thank the department heads, Julie Stevens and Odelia Callery, for a considerable amount of work that they've undertaken to provide the background for today's discussion. Next slide, please. So today's short presentation is intended to provide you with an overview of a COVID-19 analysis as well as some potential additional cost savings. And after a question and answer period, staff are hopeful to receive direction on the desired amendments to the budget with a view to its finalization. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of the refresher, as you'll recall, the staff recommended budget tabled last Friday contained a net levy increase of 4.57%. And as tabled, that budget enables the township to fulfill existing contractual obligations, maintain legislative compliance, maintain current service levels, increase the level of infrastructure reserves, and work towards achievement of council's priorities and address emergent needs. And you may recall this table from the beginning of the Treasurer's report and last Friday as well. And it shows the impact to a typical residential property owner. So the net levy increase as was proposed was 4.57%. Assessment growth was 1.42%, which results in a net impact to the existing taxpayer of 3.1%. So that represents an increase of just over $19 for a property valued at $500,000. And you can see on the right portion of the slide, it shows the major components. The overall tax rate will increase by 0.91%. And with the levy change, that's 4.57%, less year-over-year increase in assessment with growth, and the impact value change being 3.66% equals the 0.91%. Next slide, please. So we also wanted to show you a slide that took into account township, district, and the provincial education portion. And so this slide shows just that. The township levy increase on a residential property assessed at $500,000 along with those other components. And as you can see, there's no change in assessment on an urban property that has municipal water and sewer services. The amount of the taxes decreases by $109. Similarly, on a rural and waterfront property where there's no tax increase, it would actually decrease by $34. Where a property increases in assessment by the average of 2.2%, the urban property would be down by $14 and a rural and waterfront property would increase by $30. So given the extraordinary times that within which we find ourselves, committee last week asked staff to review the recommended budget as it relates to COVID-19 impacts. And you also wanted us to look at potential cost savings, additional cost savings. And as it relates to COVID-19, Table 1 in the staff report contains the analysis, and as can be seen, staff are anticipating that the estimated shortfall will be less than 0.6% on the levy. And you'll notice we gave two scenarios, one with a reopening in July, one with a reopening in October. The reason that we're anticipating this smaller impact is that in relation to other neighboring municipalities, the township doesn't offer the degree of revenue dependent services like transit or recreational or cultural programming. And where we do offer programming, arenas, swim programming, etc., it's subsidized by the tax levy. So the starting point, or the sort of the ending point of last week, the starting point of today is committee, I believe there was committee consensus on savings related to the additional Habitat for Humanity request, the electronic doctor patient wait list, as well as additional council remuneration and health benefits. Now, turning our mind to the potential additional cost savings, Table 2 in the report identifies the additional savings that committee had requested. I think it's important that committee understand that staff don't support their approval. However, we do respect that committee must make tough decisions. And you'll note that the table is divided into 3 columns, with the first referring to ongoing programs and services, so community guide, etc. The second is planned service enhancements, so contracted video services. And in the third, or the HR area, there's a cost of living adjustment item, and it's there because of existing council policy. The second, the market compensation review, was also another item that was approved by council previously. So interestingly, the mayor has mentioned this, and he and I didn't collaborate on our speaking notes, but in the same vein, as the township is in the business of delivering services, our staff team is key in that business. And these items that I've just mentioned will ensure that we can continue to recruit and retain competent and dedicated people to guide us through these tough times and help shape and implement our plan, our new strategic plan, to deal with future problems. And I think it's, readily evident that the township has an infrastructure deficit, and that's noted in our 10-year forecast, capital forecast. Next slide, please. So the last area of potential cost savings which committee could potentially consider involves contributions to reserves. And I believe the report provides a synopsis for staff's comments in that area. Thank you. And now we're open to questions, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Maybe we'll go back to the full screen again if we can. Appreciate that. I'm not sure if your speaker's on or not, but or your microphone, but there we go. Everyone's back. Let me ask right now on the report right now, and I think the best way to sort of tackle this, if there's any specific high-level questions of our CAO, certainly now is the time to do those. But what I was hoping to do is to sort of dive in. I think the table 2 in particular right now is probably going to be a good starting point for us to work our way through. But I will ask council if there's any questions at this point on specific questions on Mr. Hammond's report before we dive into some of the cost cutting, and we can go through, and I'll almost say it's really line by line, but department by department in that table 2 item. So does anyone have any specific questions or general questions overall of Mr. Hammond's report this morning? Councillor Kelley, then Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a real quick question. When I look through, and maybe it'll come up when we talk through table 2, when I look through your report, I'm not sure that I can tie any of these numbers back to what you assume will be the cost of reconfiguring or retrofitting assets, buildings, and equipment in order to give people the opportunity to to remain social distancing. And I mean specifically, you get a pickup truck going by with 2 guys in it. Can we do that afterwards? Do we have to get some kind of a sneeze shield between them? Or and I don't see where that's factored in here. Maybe I just don't see it.
Okay, I think probably Director Becking might be best to answer what kind of protocols or what kind of funding there might be in place regarding staff management and dealing with COVID protocols. Mr. Becking?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a bit of a moving target. There is going to have to be some modifications in terms of, to use the councillor's vernacular, a sneeze shield in certain locations within Township Hall. We are able to meet social distancing requirements currently, and we would continue to do so. I do anticipate that there will be some increases in cost of operations, but I also see them as being very minor in the grand scheme of things. So I'm not concerned that the budget that's before you will be ballooning as a result of COVID. I am aware that there are discussions ongoing at a very high level between AMO and the province, with representing the position of municipalities and seeking their assistance in the same way as other organizations are seeking assistance from various governments for expenses that are directly attributable to the spread of the virus. Hopefully those are successful, but in short, I don't believe that council should anticipate any significant ballooning of expenses as a result of COVID beyond the projections that have been put before you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Zavitz, I saw your hand up, but it looks like it's been taken down. Did you have a specific question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Actually, perhaps more of thank you, Your Worship, and through you, perhaps more of a position statement than anything. It would be my preference as one vote to actually not go through the COVID piece, which is in the document, the public document that everyone is now seeing, is not at all fulsome in fact, standing here 1 week ago, it does not engage my frame of thinking at all in terms of the enormity of COVID. And I think that to frame this thing up in a different way, I'll defer to my peers here, but to go through line by line and decide what to cut out at this point in time, I think I look at both pieces, both documents, both aspects to the documents that we were provided yesterday. So to comment on that, I think that there is a different way. There's a better way. And I think to spend 2 hours going through this thing line by line is not going to get me anywhere near a yardstick. I may lose that when it ultimately comes down to where the council decides to go. But it would seem to me that if there are alternatives out there, solutions out there to the budget where we find ourselves, investigating at this point in time, I certainly would like to hear them. And I happen to know through collaboration with Councillor Kelley, extensive collaboration, that there could be a better way. And I would certainly defer to that councillor through you, Chair, to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I guess what I'm trying to understand, we a week ago said we're not happy as general committee to move forward at 4.5%. We've asked staff to go back as our committee to look at additional cuts to try and identify and understand that COVID is a reality. We have in that report that was provided to us, I think there is somewhere between a $50,000 or an $80,000, I'm picking up round numbers, potential negative impact on our overall budget, depending on when we reopen, if we reopen in July or we reopen in October. I guess, Councillor Zavitz, my question to you specifically is if you state there's a better way to do this, as opposed to stating that, I guess I'm going to need to kind of understand what you're missing and some very specifics about what you're missing so that we can have our CAO or our treasurer, Commissioner Stevens, potentially answer those, what you're missing, and we may not be able to at this particular time. So I'll go to Councillor Zavitz first, and I see Councillor Kelley has a question.
Good. Thank you, Your Worship. And so I think the cuts that I see on the two, if I might say, COVID sensitivity columns, if you will, whether it's the pre or post, however we embrace it as a council, I think are brutal. I think they're almost social in perspective, and I would not be supporting the document whatsoever. I won't be. And I think that if we could listen to and hear Councillor Kelley, he does have an interesting perspective on this. My concern is very clearly, I will not support cutting programs. And I think what we've done here is we've gone in now, we've dove in line by line and just started cutting away 20,000, 18,000, 30,000. How could we even contemplate cutting out the Chamber of Commerce? I don't even understand that. Ballot in Bloom, Port Carling in Bloom, Walker's Point in Bloom. I mean, if we take away people's hope, their surroundings, and we give them, this thing, we are going to pop out of this. But what I was trying to get to last week, and I hope we can get to this week, is a real understanding of the enormity of COVID. And if we don't acknowledge that, I won't support the document. So I would ask you respectfully through you to perhaps hear, if the others could hear what Councillor Kelley has to table.
More than happy to have a question and let Councillor Kelley speak. I see his hand is up, and we'll do that. I think, Councillor Zavitz, we have to work as a collective team, and this collective team a week ago sent staff and said, if we need to lower a 4.5% levy and we need to take money out of a budget, please go back and find a way to do that. And we've sent our staff a way to do that. So that was our direction. If council at this particular time wants to go in a different direction, that's every right we have to do. So I appreciate that it didn't go in what you thought was going to be done, and we can adjust that accordingly. I will say again, remember, it's our staff that deliver programs, and so there would be cuts because we put away money for programs, and if we need to make financial cuts, we have to remove some programs. But I'll go to Councillor Kelley. Maybe you want to help Councillor Zavitz out.
Okay, thank you, and through you. But I can get into the details of what I'm talking about. But before we get there, we did send staff back and asked to find ways to make economies on the present budget that was presented last week. And I suppose one way to do that would be to do what I would call, and it's no disrespect, a slash and burn. Cut out programs, cut out things that may or may not be integral to the fabric of our society here. The problem, and I don't mind dealing on that level either, except for the fact that if you think that sitting here alone in a room yelling into a television screen is any sort of healthy financial debate, is any way to really go through this thing in any detail, you're absolutely wrong. This is not at all conducive. And I realize we're under stressful times and difficult times. I do not propose to go through this line by line. As I made it clear in a letter that was sent to the CAO last week, I respect his role and his responsibility. And I'd like for him to go through and find a way to reduce the load. And quite frankly, I will not support any increase in over last year's taxes. Any budget that contemplates an increase, I will not support it. So my approach is a little bit different. And my approach is quite simply, take a look at last year, 2019. I think we did a hell of a job servicing our constituents. I didn't hear of anybody who felt that they were short of funds from the municipality. We weathered through a flood scenario and an emergency scenario. We've supported and looked after grants and programs that are here for the arts and here for our neighborhood and our everything that is Muskoka. We looked out for the environment, and we did it for considerably less money than budget 20 is anticipating we call for. We did it for considerably less money than the tax assessment we laid on our constituents. The tax assessment here in the township of Muskoka Lakes, going back I only have information back 9 years, is up 4 times, I believe it is. I've got the number here, 4 times the cost of living over the same 9 years. But those were great 9 years, booming years. The economy was great. Unemployment was zero, and everybody's property values were going up. If you're ever going to flex and spend, maybe that's when you do it. It's not the situation now. So my proposal is as simple as this. Look at what we spent line item by line item on our expenses for last year and match it dollar for dollar. Cut no programs, reduce nobody's load, match it dollar for dollar. In addition to that, I'm willing to spring for, let's just say 2% or 2.2% envelope to cover for the fact that the cost of inflation, the cost of living increased through the end of February before the bottom fell out of everything. Cost of living was up a little over 2%. So we'll create an envelope of 2.2%, which the leadership team, the CAO and his department heads have the ability to sort of sprinkle over wherever they need to on expenses that can't be wrangled in at last year's rate. Okay. Programs don't get cut.
So Councillor Kelley, if I can, and from a council perspective, again, I'm going to bring us back to what we decided a week ago was we sent staff back. I think staff very clearly heard their concerns about COVID. We always have an ability to say yes or no. Staff have gone through and have provided a recommendation. Staff are still recommending, a 4.5% budget increase. That is the recommendation they made a year ago. And I will remind people that in that budget increase, there is a significant contribution to reserves. And I understand that based on a right now 10-year capital forecast of roughly, we need to put away $39 million. And we're spending roughly $60 million over that 10-year capital. So I don't want to change the pitch again because we've sent our staff away to do some work, to do line by line hard items, to look at each department. The document that's before us has some stuff based on last year, what we've been doing, what can be removed. And I think that that may become clear. So I appreciate that it may not be what one or two councillors want to see at this time or are not happy with the staff report. Ultimately, we have to deliver a budget. And we are in COVID times, and we are all right now, until the province releases that, going to be looking at a computer screen to be able to put a budget forward and actually manage the affairs of this town. There is no other option on the table for that. So I'm going to go through right now, and I think, and again, I appreciate the councillor's comments. Let me just do this quickly. Councillor Jaglowitz, I know, wants to have a costume. Again, I don't have a clear decision. I appreciate Councillor Zavitz's comments and Councillor Kelley's comments that they want a different approach, but that wasn't the approach that this council gave our staff a week ago. So we have gone through, we have asked staff to look department by department, and that's what we are going to follow at this particular point. Councillor Jaglowitz has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, it's not a question. I thought we were in commentary. Is this an appropriate time, for my opinion?
So, okay, we're going to do that in a second. Councillor Kelley or Councillor Zavitz?
Sorry?
Councillor Kelley. Oh, sorry, I got muted. Councillor Kelley. I appreciate that we have not, or staff in your opinion has not answered the question specifically. You may disagree with an approach of how to go forward, but we directed staff to do that at this particular time. So I believe we owe it to staff to go through department by department. They are the ones who are answering our questions from a week ago to find ways to save money, to lower the tax rate. That's the fundamental question from a week ago. Councillor Kelley, you want to unmute your microphone, and then I'm going to move on. Peter?
My only question is, did we ask staff to go back and find programs to cut, or did we just ask them to come back with a reduced budget? Because my solution doesn't cut programs and achieves, frankly, a net 2% reduction in the tax load and tops up reserves.
So I appreciate that, Councillor Kelley. Again, I haven't seen your proposal from a line by line perspective, because ultimately at the end of the day, each department head will be going through their departments line by line. Here's our staff costs. Here's the programs we deliver. And where can we save money? We do know that if it cost us $1 to build a road last year, it's probably going to cost us $1.03 to build the road today. We do understand that. So there is a cost of living increase. What has been proposed to us today are certain areas to remove things, but ultimately, I'll say it again, the only thing we do as a municipality is deliver programs. We deliver roads, we deliver planning departments, we deliver stuff, and that all costs money to deliver to the public. A final comment, Councillor Kelley, and then I'm going to go and move on.
I just can't believe that we're, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to sit, I'll sit here and we'll go through this line by line. I had no intention of offering up sacrificial lambs.
Okay.
I had every intention of managing to the same expense load as last year, plus a small amount for a cost of living increase, and still coming in at or slightly below last year's tax level.
Okay, so I appreciate that. And I guess I want to try and encourage Councillor Jaglowitz. I'm going to get to you next. Thank you. I just want to encourage council. We set direction for staff. We ask staff to manage certain programs. We say come in at a 0%, a 10%, of whatever budget. That's our budget direction. I know Councillor Jaglowitz has a resolution on the table that's not going to solve the problem today. It's going to certainly help as we amend our budget forecasting policies for next year. But we are today dealing with a budget where our staff have made a recommendation. If you don't want to cut programs, then we're going to cut savings and we're not going to put money into reserves. That's the simple answer to that. But I'm going to go right now. Councillor Jaglowitz, did you want to make a comment, or do you want to go where? Your hand's been up for a while.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I would. I think it is appropriate for me to make my comments now because they do deal with your request. So I'm going to go through the staff report, if you don't mind, in chronological order. And the first item was COVID-19. And I agree with staff's recommendation on page 3 of that report. And I recommend that we endorse their final statement. It says that the budget be approved without COVID-19 amendments and direct staff to make every effort to reduce discretionary expenditures to mitigate any unfavorable variances related to revenue shortfalls. I do have confidence that our staff can manage that, and I would leave that in your capable hands. Moving on to the second part, which is table 2, I had hoped that my motion that was seconded by someone would have been discussed first, and that would have set the tone for what I'm going to say. But I'll just be brief. That motion is actually asking this council to listen to what the public's saying and review our policy, which has not been reviewed since 2017, even though that policy says it should be reviewed annually. So part of what I'm recommending is based on the fact that that be approved. So let's talk about this year's budget. And what I would be asking for is that we establish a budget principle. And if we take the assessment growth in any year, and this year it's 1.42% without the phase-in changes, because that's just a reapportionment, and we add a reasonable inflation factor, and I used the 1.9% that was given in the staff increases, we come out at 3.32%. And that would seem to me to be a reasonable way to look at this year's budget. I know, and I want to address the 2019 actual figures. And I know there's a lot of people that would like to use that as the comparison. And I guess I would like to also. But basically, I have no confidence in those numbers. I don't believe they form a good base. Plus, there's been certain restatement of facts that I think they provide an unreliable comparison. Therefore, I don't think we have any choice but to gauge the increases based on the 2019 budget figures, which is what staff had done. I also agree with the staff recommendation at the end of the table 2 list on page 6, that the following not be approved. I'm not talking about cuts that they have put forward and they recommend against them. I also recommend against them. That is the official plan review and its associated costs, the budget software and implementation costs, the swim program, although that may happen naturally through the COVID thing. I also do not agree to cut $71,000 from grants, although I do agree with some cuts. So I would not touch the Chamber of Commerce, for example, the Bala Cranberry, Muskoka Museum, the Walker Point Library. I also do not agree that we should be cutting the 1.9 increase to staff or the market compensation increases.
Councillor Jaglowitz, I wanted some general, if I may, just some general comments. So my comment 10 minutes ago was that staff have provided us a number of specific items. You're now getting into, I agree with this or I don't agree with this. What happened a week ago is we had lots of comments. We had people from 30% reduction in taxes to a 5 to 4.5% increase in taxes. And what was very evident is we did not give specific clear direction other than for staff to go back and find us options. We didn't give a target. We didn't give a number. So this council a week ago told staff to go back and give us options.
Respectfully, Mr. Mayor, may I continue? I won't be that long.
Okay,
May I
so
just
I
continue?
do, but Councillor Jaglowitz, in the ability for all of us to chime in on your comments, I want to have a comment about staff. I want to have a comment about official plan review. And in an order in trying to keep this meeting focused and moving forward, please don't get into specifics. I like the high level comments you've made about things, about the overall staff report. But I said, again, 15 minutes ago, we're going to deal with those specific items, and we need to deal with them on a one-by-one basis because you're pulling out items that other people may have a differing opinion on, and we need to deal with it that way. So if there's a specific item, I'm going to have.
Yes, I have, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate if you just let me continue, and then you can tell people to disregard what I said, if that's your position. So to carry on, looking at the schedule that we've been asked to look at line by line, I don't need to look at it line by line, but I would like to look at it department by department. So if we take the first area, which is called council.
Councillor Jaglowitz, I am going to cut you off at this particular point. Thank you, because we are going to department by department is what I recommended, again, 15 minutes ago, and we'll have our chance to talk department by department. But to try and do it in totality at this point, where we have not able to have a discussion, if you're chairing this meeting and you want to talk department by department, that's great. I'm here at this particular point. So are there any other specific comments or general comments in nature before we go and do what we ask staff to do? Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to start right now with council. And if everyone has table 2 in front of them, we started, and last week we recommended that we defer the wage increase and the benefits increase of council to 2021. Specifically, does anybody have any objections to those 2 items coming out of this particular budget? I'm going to ask for questions or comments. Councillor Jaglowitz will get you to clear your flag, or maybe Ms. Hollows will get that flag cleared. Thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz, you have a question regarding those 2 specific items. Your microphone. Thank you.
Yes. Are we now going through the items?
Yes, we are.
And am I allowed to speak on that item, or do I have to ask a question?
So I have asked for council's comments. A week ago, we as council recommended to staff, it was clear that we were going to take out the wage.
So, Mr. Mayor, I agree with the staff's recommendation under the heading of council.
Okay, thank you very much. And that it was actually council's comment at the time to take those 2 items out. Does anyone have any differing opinion on that at this particular time? Okay, so the only other thing is there's a note on there about conferences. They had bumped up the conference spending by $2,000. They're recommending they go back to the 2019 budget, which would be a reduction of $2,000. Does anybody have a problem with that? That's staff saying, we know we're not going to put extra conferences in there. We're going to remain at the same. Okay, we're good. Council is done. Staff, and I'm assuming Ms. Stevens, you're taking notes of this and we'll get us a new revise at the end of this. So I don't think you need to respond. From the clerk's department, the clerk's department has said we anticipated potentially a little bit more legal fees going into 2020, but they're recommending right now that we bring our legal fees back to what we spent in 2019, which would be probably in line with what Councillor Kelley and Councillor Zavitz are asking. Councillor Jaglowitz, you have a question on the legal fees.
No, on the entire department recommendation, I agree with the staff's recommendation to reduce all those costs.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone have anything different in those costs as recommended by staff in the clerk's department? Any specific comments? Councillor Jaglowitz, Councillor Kelley first of all, then Councillor Edwards.
I want to understand what eliminate septic reinspection means. I mean, I guess it's pretty obvious, but I'm not sure how we justify that.
Okay, I would go to Mr. Donald potentially, if you want to comment on that, or do you want to actually, I'll maybe go to the clerk. It's under your department, but basically it would be canceling our septic reinspection program, if I'm not mistaken. So if we were to remove that item of $22,000, we would be removing our septic inspection program from the list. Councillor Bridgman, I see actually Councillor Roberts. Well, I'm going to use you if you can, folks, use the raise hand feature on the Zoom. Councillor Roberts, first of all. We'll get your microphone open, Councillor Rob. There we go.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted a clarification on the second item. Under the clerk, purchase of goods and services, defer offsite record storage and projection, our project. Would I like to know what is the risk to the township of deferring that?
Okay, so generally, I think we're all okay to reduce our legal, excuse me. Let's go on right now to where there's a clarification question on the offsite record storage. Madam Clerk.
So we had investigated potentially storing some records off-site through an archives facility due to the limited space that we have. We are also putting funds to reserves to build potentially a future facility of our own. The records that we would put off site are records that would be permanent in nature that cannot be destroyed. It would, it would be a matter of deferring that for a year, and the boxes continue to, the space is cramped. So that was what the program was for.
Councillor Roberts, does that answer basically what
So the impact is just storage, then we'd have to climb over boxes for 1 year longer.
That is
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Mazan? Can you mute your microphone? Okay. Are you speaker? Councillor Mazan?
Thank you. I'm generally supportive of reducing the legal down by 18,000 or back to last year's actuals, but I would find it difficult to support eliminating the septic reinspection program. I feel like that's a core business. It's something that is important to the environment. We talked about this quite a bit. So I would have a difficult time saying we shouldn't do that this year.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Mayor Harding. Can we put a question mark column in here in terms, I'd like to see what the numbers look like before I decide on the septic. Can we do that? I don't know what you're.
Well, I think we can do that individually, and so we'll put a question on there. I know there's some differing opinions on that, but I would leave that again. Please, and I appreciate council that we're somewhat frustrated in how we're doing this, but what I do know about this council, we want to discuss things, and these are line by line items that we are going to have to discuss and debate specifically. So if I'm not mistaken, everybody is okay to reduce the legal fees by $18,000. Is there anybody, and that's based on last year's actual. So we're okay. And that again comes to Councillor Zavitz and Kelley's comments of let's go to last year's actuals. The $5,000, again, this is what our clerk's department has said. Hey, they could delay this program. We don't have to do the offsite storage. We're going to climb over some boxes, but we didn't have it last year. We didn't have the year before. It was planned for this year. But in a COVID times, if we can save some money, yes, we could delay that a year. So is there anybody who's jumping up and down saying we need to put that in place this year? I think we're all pretty much in favor that we could delay that. The next two are very small adjustments. Actual survey costs we could get rid of. Consultant fees, I think they're sort of in the same things, just kind of playing to last year's budget. So they're not debate. The one debate item is that it's going to be septic system. And if you'd like, we're happy to circle back on septic system as a controversial issue, if I may. Or do you want to, is there anybody who really wants to put a comment on there right now? I see Councillor Edwards' hand is up.
Yes, thank you very much. I would say leave the septic inspection in. One is it's creating a job, which is good. And second, it's important for the environment and that. So I would definitely leave that in and that.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Edwards. I'll get Councillor Kelley on that one particular. I think we might actually get to land this airplane on the septic. Councillor Kelley.
Okay, pretty much the same comment. If it, if this program actually adds value, and I assume that it does, or we wouldn't have it on our roster, cutting out environmental protection doesn't seem like a very wise way to find budget saving.
Correct. Okay, Councillor Zavitz, you had a question or comment?
Yes, I would never support cutting that particular item. We ran on it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Hayes, final comments. Microphone, we'll get Denelda. The other button. She might be trying to do it too. Hang on, we might.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. Leave that in. That's a very important issue.
Okay, so generally, if I look around this Zoom room, we are pretty much in favor of keeping the septic inspection program in. Anyone a differing opinion? But the other items would be able to come out of the clerk's department. Okay, we're good for there. Community development. Just to highlight a little bit, the one item of video development, as we've done a number of Facebook messages, the idea was to enhance some of our stuff, some money aside. I know that Mr. Moore has suggested that we don't really need to do that. I would support that, to be honest with you. We've done a printed community guide. We could go electronic as a 6,500. There's some downtown trail maps and the visitor kiosk center. As an overall, I think the one, just as a perspective going through a lot of this document, I think the one thing that we are going to see in a COVID summer of 2020 is a reduction in visitors. The tourism component to our community will certainly be down this year. Who knows how hotels are going to be able to operate? I think that in particular is going to change. We'll have our regular seasonal residents, but I think that people coming up and saying, oh, where's Turtle Jacks and need the brochure is one of the things. So is there anyone who would like to, I'll go to the contracted video services. Anybody who really wants to keep that in specifically at this time? Councillor Jaglowitz, you have a question?
No, it's not a question. I support all of the recommended cuts in community development.
Okay. Anybody else have a differing opinion? Anything you'd like to specifically keep within community development? Councillor Roberts.
I'm just thinking about, hopefully, we're going to have a business unusual type of, we're going to have some business. And I'm thinking if the visitor kiosk center, of all the things in that item, we would keep just to promote the township for the individuals that come. I'm not hard on this, but I'm just thinking it could be one we could keep.
Okay, I appreciate that. I can park that. I think the other corresponding note to that, there's $2,500 there, but there's also a $20,000 fee that goes to the chamber to keep an employee sitting in that booth this summer. So it ends up at a $22,500 ticket to have a visitor center in Port Carling. Maybe you want to change your answer, Councillor Roberts?
Yes, thank you for the clarification. I will change my answer.
Okay, so generally speaking, if I read the room, Councillor Mazan has a question, and then I'll go to Councillor Edwards.
Just clarification then on that, when you talk about the visitors center kiosk under community development, what is that and how is that different than the other $20,000?
If I'm not mistaken, we cost us about $2,500 to move the kiosk. It's stored right now at our yard in Port Carling, but to pick it up and move it over and put it on the lot, because it's not a permanent location, we're not allowed to keep it permanently beside the locks.
So this is the Port Carling kiosk that we're talking about. So the question here, or the line item here is, do we have a kiosk in Port Carling?
Correct.
Because we already have the fixed info center. So the fixed info center in Bala is the $20,000?
No, the fixed info, well, that's their facility. They run their facility. We have been funding the chamber roughly $27,000, I think. And then also a $20,000 for our Port Carling Visitor Center.
So then the question here really is, do we want to have any kind of visitor center this year in Port Carling?
Correct. That is the
ultimate. That's that 25.
Correct.
And
well,
one could argue.
It's 2,500 plus 20,000 to open the visitor center in Port Carling. So I think we need to look at it that way.
Okay. Thank you.
So I think generally, if I can work my way, oh, Councillor Edwards, my apologies.
Thank you very much. At this time, I would leave it in. You know, they're telling Canadians to travel in Canada this year, and I don't think there's too many going to go to the States this year. I was talking with somebody in Newfoundland the other day. There's all kinds of people wanting to go out and see the icebergs out there, so they're still getting tourists, which they're trying to discourage up until a certain point. But we may have some visitors. I would leave that in. We can always take it out at a later date. And that, but I would leave the 2,500 in, and the other, I could accept taking everything else out at this
Okay.
point. Thank
So
you.
I'm going to, right now, as we work our way through, I'm going to put a hold or a pause on the 2,500. But I think staff, the 1,365 and 3,000 can come out from it. Yeah, everything else I think is okay. Let's move on to IT, our consulting fees. So we have some budget software to get to better accounting. Madam Clerk, is there any questions specifically anyone has on these, or Madam Clerk, do you want to explain a little bit what some of those items, because they are fairly large items that have to be done. Madam Clerk?
So the consulting fees for $50,000 is half of the 100,000 that was in the budget. It is 50,000 is for the asset management program, and so that project is partway through. So I would not recommend cutting that 50,000. This one is for the budget software, which we're in need of. There's a capital item as well, which is 49,400 on the capital spreadsheet, which goes with this project. And there's also annual licensing fees that go with that project. So I would defer to Julie on the specifics of the need for this. And it's pretty vital, I think.
Julie, do you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the having been through this process, and I think what this council really wants to get to is the ability to look at numbers a little differently. And it's really, really challenging to do that in Excel. And as you may appreciate, there's not a lot of, it's really easy to make mistakes in Excel, number one. We do a lot of reconciliation to make sure that it happens, but it would be a lot simpler if the group had a budget software. The one that's being proposed is the one that the district uses. And I would say that it's a relatively simple implementation, and it would take this corporation to sort of the next level as far as being able to look at their numbers next year. It's not the be all and end all by any means, but it will give some format and structure to the budget that I think you're looking for.
Okay, thank you for that, Julie. I know Councillor Jaglowitz wants to comment. I want to make a comment because I know everybody's somewhat frustrated as we've moved forward with some budgeting, with some accounting issues, with trying to do a better job. And I think all of the items specifically in our information technology department here right now are going to get us to better information going forward. And I think that's what we've heard definitely from Commissioner at the district going forward. Councillor Jaglowitz, you want to comment?
Yes, I did. I do not support any cuts in this area. I would leave them all in. I think it's very important.
Okay, I'm getting a general nod. Is there anyone who's got a contrary opinion to that wants to see some cuts in this area? Okay, IT is good. Fire department, and maybe we can kind of go through here. The first item of $20,000, just understand, I think I've got some more clarity, and many of you may have as well from our fire chief. Right now we go out, we don't charge anybody for false alarms for the first call. I think we do the second or third call, there's minimal. There's a potential we could change that, if you will, that we could recoup and update our fire bylaw to get $20,000 there. I'm going to chime in ahead of time here on a comment. We have a lot of seasonal residents who've been told not to be here, and they may get a little upset when they can't be at their property and their fire alarm goes off, and we send them a bill. But that's what we may be entering here, and that's the idea. Any comments on the fire false alarm? I think it's definitely a program we need to put in place, but it might be delayed a year. Anybody comment? Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you. I support this item being removed from the budget.
Okay. Anybody else want to try and get an extra $20,000?
Sorry, I said that incorrect. I apologize. It's not removed from the budget. I support the fire chief's concept of increasing the revenue on the false alarms, because it's not just the cost, it's the fact that homeowners are going to have to be more careful, because a great percentage of these, when they respond to this, they respond with fire trucks, pumpers, and everything. So I think I support that as a deterrent.
Okay. Anybody a differing opinion? So that would be a change of service. Councillor Bridgman, I see your hands up, and then Councillor Roberts.
Just what is the fee? I'm sorry if you said I missed it.
I have not. I'll go to actually our fire chief. Chief Morrell, maybe you want to comment about this particular item and how you see this bylaw changing, what we're currently doing, and how we would implement this.
Thank you. Through you, your worship. Essentially what this is it's located right on our website under our fees and services bylaw for anybody to look at anytime. But I'll give you a quick snapshot of what last year looked like. It was 126 calls for service that classified in this alarm malfunction category. And what we're suggesting to council is that we amend the fees and services bylaw. Instead of making the first malfunction on alarm free, and the second one being just the call for service for one vehicle, that we apply all charges towards every false alarm. So there are some implications with this. Usually it's grumpy citizens. So we just want to make sure that council's fully aware of that piece. A lot of jurisdictions in Ontario do allow that first false alarm being free. We estimate, based on last year's call volume, that this would increase that line item that you see on our main operating budget from $26,000 to roughly $58,000. And that's if only one vehicle were to attend calls. So we were being conservative in our estimation that for the remainder of the year, it would be $20,000 increase inside of our budget.
Okay, Councillor Edwards wanted to comment. Oh, sorry, Barb.
Excuse me,
Follow up.
Sorry, what is the cost? I just wondered what you charged. That was my question.
Sorry, I made a long-winded answer. I was trying to describe the whole thing, but it's $465 per working hour of a fire truck doing anything. Through you.
Okay, so again, we could put a bylaw in place, and if a false alarm came through, we'd be charging roughly $500 to that citizen for us to respond. Okay, I see, sorry, in order, Councillor Edwards and then Councillor Roberts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. As staff had said at the start of this, there's their recommendations, but they wouldn't recommendation any cuts. And at this point, I would leave the fire department alone. I wouldn't touch it because you've got, I think the first call should be free. I think that the new recruits should be left alone. The personal welfare, wellness, and safety should be left alone. That public education is a very good thing, and I think public education could be useful. So I wouldn't touch. And again, the maintenance I would leave alone at this point. Thank you.
Hey, Councillor Roberts.
Okay, just speaking to the false alarm, I think this is a drastic change in our service that we provide. I think it should be left alone this year, and that we should bring this back to council to really discuss the implementation of this drastic change. And I'll reserve my comments till the end on the other ones.
Okay. I'm getting a general sense, and I realize that there's potentially $20,000 on the table, but we're putting in place a new fee and we're charging our taxpayers more money to be able to do this right now. And I appreciate way Councillor Roberts has said this, that, you know, we should probably debate this around the table, not necessarily on a Zoom call, trying to rush it through for budget and looking for money. And we can implement it. We can put it out there to the public and get better public feedback on a change in this bylaw. Do people disagree with that, or is that probably a general good sense going forward? So Councillor Zavitz now and Councillor Mazan, Bridgman. So we're going to pause. We're not going to implement the false alarms at this particular point. Is there anything else in the fire department? I think Councillor Edwards also was supportive of not cutting our fire department budget at this point. You know, we need some new recruits. There's some personal wellness and safety. I think there's some small items there that can be done. And I think maybe a direction to staff to try and save money where we can. Councillor Jaglowitz? I need you to unmute your microphone. Frank, thank you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So my position is I support the first item, that the charge be put in. I support the reduction of the free smoke detectors for $3,500, and I support the vehicle and boat maintenance for use in parades and so on of $10,000. So I support a $33,500 cut.
Okay, so we seem to have some differing opinions on this, so I'm going to try and do a hands up, generally speaking, right now to get some ideas, and if we're close, we might park those items. How many people, and let me just look at that first item, if I may, at present, would like to put in place a new bylaw to charge people for first calls for false alarms? If you can raise your hand. I see Councillor Jaglowitz and Councillor Kelley. Okay, so that's a no. Anybody want to defer trying to put some pay in there for new recruits? Or we want to get some new recruits? Everybody's good. I think we're looking at some new recruits. Sorry, Ruth, I missed you. Ruth, you're against? Okay, so we're going to leave that in. Personal wellness and safety, $5,000. Councillor Nishikawa is against the personal wellness and safety, or you want to keep it in? Ruth? I'll get you to unmute your microphone so we can hear you. Thank you.
I'm really challenged that can look at doing any kind of new wage improvements. I'm really challenged with that. Just read a very long email. My hair bleeding. And I recognize that we won't the answers of when they get up and all of it. So I just can't say that I can approve of that today. I really think that would be looked at next year.
Okay, sorry, I'm anybody else hearing? I'm having a hard time understanding Councillor Nishikawa from, I guess, from an internet perspective. Ruth, we're fire department again. Is there a specific item that you want a reduction based on these items, or do you want to leave fire department alone? And maybe we'll try and get you just to say that one more time so I get a handle on what you're saying. Oh, I think your microphone's still muted, Ruth.
It's the host that's doing it.
Okay, there we go.
Your question specifically was, do more money? You didn't use the word benefit, but for staff for the fire department. That was specifically the question.
Councillor Nishikawa, I'm going to ask something in this just as a trial right now. If you turn your video off just for a moment when you speak, it may be less data going through your internet connection. Is it possible you can turn your video off and then we might be able to hear you better? I'm just trying to see, because I know everyone else is struggling to hear and want to have your input. Yeah. No, I still see Councillor Nishikawa's video. Councillor Nishikawa, is it possible to turn your video feed off? There we go. Now let you talk and see if it works a little better. And unmute. I don't know who's unmuting. Is it the? I know, well, she's probably trying as well. Okay, so Councillor Nishikawa's video is off, which is great. And Ruth, I'm going to let you try and unmute your microphone. We'll leave any of the hosts here, leaving it alone. There we go. Okay, go Ruth.
You want to say?
Oh, okay. So I can sort of hear you. Do you want to start what you said again? Okay, I don't think that's working either. I think we have a 1-800 phone number they can call in. Do we not? Do we have a phone? Okay. Councillor Nishikawa, we're just trying to figure out how, or maybe we could call. Can we call her on that speakerphone? Because definitely want to have her input. It's kind of difficult at this point. Councillor Nishikawa, I know it's difficult. We're having a hard time hearing you, and wondering if we should call you at your home phone number. I think that's probably the best. Hold on one second. We're going to try and call you at your home phone number. Just providing that phone number. So hopefully we'll be able to answer that call, and then we'll put you on speakerphone in the council chambers here. Phone calls coming in right now. I don't want to say that number over the phone. Oh, okay, then let me give you another one. Try the mobile. Okay, Ruth, we're going to try and call you on your mobile at this point. Okay.
Hi, Ruth, it's Cheryl. I'm just going to put you on speaker, okay?
Okay, so for the rest of council, we've just reached Councillor Nishikawa on speaker. And Ruth, do you want to speak? See if we can hear that.
What do you want me to say? Sorry.
Sorry, we couldn't hear your comments on the fire department. So, and I know all of council.
I have no comment now.
Okay. Okay. So I guess if you want, you could turn on your Zoom call again, your video, and we'll try and work our way through this. So yeah, we're going to hang up the phone line. Right, we realize that. Okay, we're going to hang up the phone line there and continue to move on. Apologize for that, everyone. Obviously, Zoom is not perfect and trying to work our way through. So let's come back to our fire department, if I may, where we were. And what we had come to terms with was that we are not going to implement our, I think, line by line, our individual bylaw to be first charge. Was there the only one who was a differing opinion with that, I think, was Councillor Kelley and Councillor Jaglowitz, but generally we're going to not implement that. Is from a remuneration of pay, defers, or anyone who wants to defer paying our recruits. Getting no, so we're fine on that line item. The personal wellness and safety, we're going to leave that $5,000 in, or does anyone want it removed? think we're generally going to leave that one in. Thank you. And then the only other item is there free smoke detectors, and that's maybe I'll go to Chief Morrell. And Chief, you can explain what we do in that public education and where that $3,500 goes.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. That $3,500 is well spent, I would say. Most jurisdictions in Ontario provide free smoke alarms to those that require it. A lot of times we end up supplying these before we issue a ticket. Once we find an offender, once we find a place or we've gone to a call and there's no smoke alarm present, we get people to sign a waiver and we provide them a free smoke alarm. We get those alarms through the Fire Marshal's Public Fire Safety Council, so they are bought at a lower rate, but we recommended, or we're not recommending this cut, by the way. None of these cuts we recommend. I just want to reiterate that, but this is an amount of money that we can provide back to council for this year.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there anybody who wants to eliminate our smoke detector program at this point? Okay, we're going to leave that one in. And then sort of the last item, there's some vehicle repairs, boat maintenance, and items where our fire department ends up going to parades. And then I also believe to license, if I'm not mistaken, Fire Chief Morrell, that when we want to train some of our drivers, we would, to get a DZ license, so on and so forth, we would offer them a vehicle to be able to get those license. And there's a cost associated with that, but ultimately we're training our staff. Is that a fair assumption in that $10,000 item?
Yes, that's a fair assumption.
Okay. Council, from a question, I mean, it may or may not be $10,000 specifically, but generally we put some money aside. I think Santa sits on top of the fire truck in Port Carling, and different in Bala, but Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you. Now, I may have misread this then. I would support leaving in the education piece, but not the participation parade. So maybe we need a better understanding of what that actual item is. And also, I maybe be under a misunderstanding. I thought, Fire Chief, that you were offering these items up. I know you don't support them being cut, but I thought you were offering them up. So maybe you can just clarify.
So just as a note for all council, staff have recommended a 4.57% budget increase, that all of these items were in there when we sent them back to say, where else could we go if we want to go lower in the budget? This is their next line that obviously offers service level implications. And that's where it became to us, our choice at that point, but they don't recommend any of these in particular. So it's our choice at this point if we want to go further. Chief Morrell, maybe you can sort of, if we want to go deeper dive into the $10,000, how that money might get split or not split.
Yeah, thank you. Through you. Speaking in terms of legislation, none of these cuts will affect any legislation that's out there today. If we were to do deeper cuts in other areas, they may affect legislation. So we would take that back to council through a reporting system. In terms of the $10,000 for reduced vehicle use, this would come from reduced use of the vehicles for patrols, where we learn to train our individual firefighters. Gas usage, where we pay for people to take vehicles up to Huntsville for DZ licensing. All sorts of vehicle use things that occur throughout the fire service today that we would just have, our staff would have to ask for permission. We know, as a matter of fact, that they've already done this right now due to COVID, but we could advance this right along. When COVID removes itself, we would not go to or attend any more parades for this year.
Okay, so I think sort of the nutshell of this $10,000 is for our fire department to be integrated into a community with some parades to show support, and then also to help our staff in training to better educate them and get different licensing, so on and so forth. And I do know had an incident out in front of my place where there was a Marine patrol attending a fire alarm, and you know, it was a new boat captain that had to be trained ultimately, which I'm assuming some of that training, dollars and cents in vehicle maintenance and gas for the boat, would come into that. So is anybody, Councillor Jaglowitz, I think, wants this item removed. Does anybody else want to remove this $10,000 item specifically? I get a shaking head, shaking head, shaking head, shaking head. 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't think we need to remove this. But I'm going to just park this because there's a few in favor. So I'm just going to park that $10,000 if I may right now. And we can come back to that. But Julie, I think you've got an idea. We're going to leave the remaining stuff in the budget. So there's no reductions from fire. Next item is that of our swim program, and would be to eliminate the swim program for 2020. Anybody want to comment on our swim program right now, or do we want to, at this point, cancel the program going forward, not understanding what's going to happen? Anyone want to chime in? No, everyone's quiet. Anyone want to keep our swim program? Councillor Jaglowitz wants to keep the swim program. Councillor Mazan, I'll let you speak to it first of all, and then Councillor Edwards.
Sorry, I was trying to get my hand up. I have a question on it. If we were, I think staff's recommendation is that we leave it in because there are so many unknowns. What is the mechanism? Like, help me understand this $18,000. If we were to leave this in today, and then come June, in some date, June 15th, we decide that this program cannot go, what then happens with this $18,000?
I'll go to Director Becking, and Ken, maybe you want to answer this?
Certainly, Your Worship. The $18,000 represents the net amount of the program. I don't recall the exact numbers, but for round numbers, we take in about $10,000, $12,000 for registrations, and the cost of the program is about $30,000 in terms of it's predominantly labor costs associated with hiring the teaching staff and the senior instructor. The net effect is 12 minus 30 or 18,000. If COVID carries on beyond, let's say the end of June, we will not be able to offer the program simply because we won't be able to adhere to the physical distancing requirements as per the provincial order. If the provincial order is modified or lifted prior to the middle or end of June, then the program would go ahead. Staff are not recommending that you make this change and keep your options open in the event that the summer proves to be an abnormal normal, and we are able to offer the program. Nonetheless, you could make a decision when you pass the budget that you're going to remove the 18,000, which essentially terminates the program for at least this year.
Okay, Councillor Mazan, answer your question. I know.
I think, sorry, just for that clear. So if we were to leave it in today, knowing that there's a lot of unknowns here, if it does get canceled, we're not then leaving money on the table? Like, would that $18,000 variance, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, would it then go and offset any COVID related costs as per table number 1?
I'm going to go Commissioner Stevens. Julie?
That's exactly correct. So if we leave it in the budget and then we can't run it because of COVID, it would then offset, we wouldn't incur the costs. And so it would then offset the other unfavorable items that we have in the budget. And it would help the impact that was noted on table 1 in the report.
Okay, so last comment, then I would support keeping this service in the budget for now, because I believe there's a lot of unknowns, and I believe that staff can handle this appropriately.
Okay, Director Becking.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in thinking about what I've just said, I just wanted to be absolutely clear. There's a lead time to this program, so the actual decision is going to have to be made earlier in June We cannot wait until the end of June to make the decision because there's a hiring process and a preparation process, and I didn't want council to be under the false impression that they had until the end of June to make a decision.
Okay, Councillor Jaglowitz.
Right, I also do not support removing this. It should be left in.
Okay. Anyone have a differing opinion? Again, at this particular point, it's a line item. If the program doesn't happen, there's no cost, no financial implications. We don't lose $18,000. If it does happen, yes, there's a negative impact. The only question I would ask, and I'll just from a clarity perspective, and I'll go to the Director Becking on this. I believe right now we're operating this swim program with, I think, maybe 3 or 4 instructors out of a couple of different locations. And I wonder what, for 1 year potentially, what if we just operated out of 1 location this year and a reduced scale that the program would potentially still be offered? Is there any savings potential, or just does it help us make a decision faster or not? Director Becking?
Your Worship, I don't believe that there would be any material effect. It really is driven by the number of registrants. You are correct. We do this with seasonal staff. There is a lead instructor and 4 individual instructors, and the program is offered in actually 2.5 locations. Part of the program is offered for 1 session up in Windermere, but the balance of the program is offered in Port Carling and Bala.
Okay, thank you. So I think general consensus right now, we're going to leave it in. And if we can have the program, it's good. Anybody have a differing opinion to that? Okay. Council committee, we've been at this for about an hour and a half right now. I'm going to suggest that we take a quick 10-minute break. Go refresh your coffees and leave your Zooms on. You can turn your cameras off if you want, but we'll keep the meeting going. And we'll be back here at about 11:40. Okay, thank you all. We're good. Council, I think we're all back. Councillor Mazan's getting her tea. And we're broadcasting again. Madam Clerk, yes, everybody? Okay. So thank you for that. And I appreciate the coffee break or tea break or whatever it was. So we've worked our way through swim programs staying in. Let's now have a next item here, and that is our library. Library have said they could reduce advertising to actuals. Again, basically they're coming into a actual budget. It's not a lot of money coming out of the library. It's about $2,000. Does anybody have a differing opinion? Or are we okay to take the couple $1,000s out of the library budget? Anybody want to chime in on this right now? Oh, Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Mayor Harding. As one of the reps on the library board, I've come to understand how important all the library programs are for our residents and seasonal people. So I would support the first two cuts, but I would really not want to see any reduction in the programs if we're able to run them. So that's my comment.
Okay, and I know, sorry, Councillor Jaglowitz, you have a question?
Oh, I agree with Councillor Bridgman.
Okay. I have a question. I think our librarian, Kathy Duck, is online. And Kathy, maybe I'll go to you specifically. The $500 program reduction, the fact that we're actually in COVID right now and we've been closed for a month and a half, is there any savings that are going to go on with that, or that $500 specifically? I'm not sure if you want to chime in on that. Are we actually going to be losing and cutting any programs specifically, or is that more of a reflection of what's currently going on with that 500? Kathy, can you?
Yeah.
There we go.
Hi. The $500 is basically a reduction because the library has been closed, so we're unable to offer any programs at this time. So I don't think you'll see a difference in programs if we are allowed to offer programs. With COVID, I don't foresee that this year we will probably be able to do much in the way of programming because of the physical distancing.
Okay, so thank you for that, Kathy. So council, generally speaking, we've heard that the $500 is already a reduction because of COVID. So we don't really need to leave that money specifically in there. Anybody different? We're good. Okay, thank you. So general consensus that the library portion of it would be edited down. Thank you, Kathy, about $2,000 for there. Let's move on to planning. And I think I've got everybody here. Yep, there we go. Now I've got everybody. From a planning perspective, and we've got some questions here. Heritage Committee reduction. And that was some money going into the Heritage Committee. I think, I'm not sure whether, David, you want to speak to that? I know I had a conversation last night with Councillor Hayes regarding that, but maybe you can explain what that money is or where it was earmarked for. David?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have too much to add on that. I would look to Councillor Hayes, in particular the chair of the Heritage and Attainable Housing Committee, and the other members of council that sit on that committee. We did discuss their budget request at a meeting, I think it was late last year in the fall of 2019. The committee requested funds of, I believe it was $22,500 for various activities. I think in particular, probably a heritage designation or two, as well as some affordable housing initiatives. However, they were not specifically outlined. And I suggested that a portion of that potentially could be reduced. But I would look to those other members of council to clarify their intention for those funds.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Hayes a little bit. You seem to have some added knowledge on this particular one.
Yeah, yes, we had talked about a Windermere district coming in, and we put aside a fair amount of money for that. And if that didn't go through, then we were looking to designate some of our properties that were already listed. But being that everything has slowed down or halted with COVID, I agree with David that that money can certainly be put back into the budget for next year should we want to go ahead with designations.
Okay, so council, anybody disagree with that comment? Councillor Jaglowitz, your hand is up.
Yes, it was up because I support for that being removed, but I don't support the remaining items being removed.
Okay, we'll get to those in just a second. So generally right now, anybody disagree regarding, I see David, is your hand up? Do you want to speak to the $15,000 removal on the heritage?
Just so everyone's abundantly clear, that would still leave about 7,500 in the budget for various activities. So I just estimated a reduction of some sort. So committee may wish to discuss that further.
Okay, so generally there's money still in the heritage budget. We're just removing some of the uptick for a heritage district. So I don't see anybody disagreeing with that at this point. So Julie, we're going to pull 15,000 out of there. The next big item is that of our official plan review that we're working on. Does anybody in particular want to defer this to a 2021, which could be done? I see a shaking of head. Anybody want to raise their hand and say, yes, we want to defer this? Okay, we're going to leave the official plan review in today's budget. Thank you. That was pretty easy. The advertising, which would the $3,000 would probably go in step with the official plan review. So we're going to need to leave that $3,000 in, obviously. And then the last item is the transfer to reserves, offset by official plan review. But again, if we're going to keep the official plan review, we're going to probably need to put some money into reserves. Everybody okay with those remaining items in planning? So we're not going to touch anything there. Commissioner Stevens.
I just wanted to clarify, that was actually a transfer from reserves to fund a portion of the OP. So yes, it goes hand in hand.
Okay, thank you. So we're good there. So we're going to take $15,000 out of planning. Great. Let's go to grants to organizations. So we've got $20,000 in events and festivals. Anybody want to chime in on this particular right now? Councillor Roberts, I see.
I guess my comments are going to be very similar to the swimming. Is that we should maybe leave all these in, or the first few in, and see what happens, and then make a decision sometime in the future.
Okay. Anybody have
on that particular one, and the cranberry Bella?
Okay. Anybody have a differing opinion on those items right now? Do we want to, Councillor Hayes?
Yeah, I don't think that we're going to get out of this in any time soon. And events and festivals are places where we encourage large gatherings of people. I think even if we are allowed some restrictions being moved, I don't think large numbers are something that we're going to look at. So our events and festivals, I think we should really take a close look at cutting for 2020 and just say the reason is the COVID, and we're encouraging people to social distance regardless of the restrictions being lifted a little bit.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in on this right now? Just a question. This will go to Councillor Nishikawa's comments from a week ago, where we talked about the potential of putting some money aside to help our community through COVID. Some, you know, does it go to food bank? Does it go to people who really are struggling financially? This pocket of money from an events and festivals, again, if we're not having events and festivals, and again, I'm not sure where we're at, but I wonder, do we want to leave this $20,000 in the budget? And as opposed to, and I'd even go down to the community grants, I'll jump down a line right now, leave Cranberry Festival alone, and there's $40,000 in there. Do we want to just keep this in a budget and earmark it potentially for community related activities? Maybe they're COVID related, maybe they're events and festivals, but let's just potentially earmark $40,000. And again, this comes back to Councillor Nishikawa's question from a week ago, to how can we support the community? Because that's ultimately what these grants are ultimately doing. And we haven't even awarded any grants. We've had some few submissions, but I know that we haven't had our grants committee say that ABC is getting X dollars. So anybody want to chime in on that? Supportive, objecting to that? Okay, Councillor Hayes.
Yeah, I know that the Walker's Point 150 celebration was to happen this year, and we did put in a grant for it. We have asked our grant to be removed because we will not be moving forward with it this year. Okay. That being said, I have no objections with taking the money from the festivals and events and the community grants and putting it into an account where we can help with COVID-related expenses.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Councillor Jaglowitz and then Councillor Mazan.
Yes, I support your suggestion that those two 20,000 numbers be amalgamated and labeled community, but I would then cut it in half and leave it at 20,000 because it's obvious some of it won't be needed.
Okay, I'll hold that idea for a second. I'll go to Councillor Mazan.
Sorry, thank you. I support the idea, Mayor Harding, of consolidating. I think it's important we keep money available to support our community, whether it's our business community. Right now, we don't know what events are going to look like. So we want to make sure, you know, there might be innovative ideas out there that allow for events. There's a lot of unknowns. So I like the idea of having something available to be able to support our community. Again, and this builds on Councillor Roberts' question. If we have the money aside, if it's not used by year end, are these funds then available to help offset any other costs associated with COVID? So in the same line of questioning.
So ultimately, at the end of the day, again, if we put a $40,000 pool for whatever it is, or 20,000 as Councillor Jaglowitz suggested, if that money remains unspent at the end of the year, it will go into our reserve account and our general reserves that eventually go back to fund programs or whatever for the taxpayers. So Councillor Edwards first, and then Councillor Kelley.
Thank you. I would leave that 40,000 in. I would leave the Ballard Cranberry in. Again, if it doesn't go, we can use it for offsetting COVID, and that's why we leave those three in, myself and that. And if we don't spend it, it helps lower the taxes for next year.
Okay, Councillor Kelley.
I just want to make sure I understand what we're talking about. We're talking about the events and festivals and the community grants, 40 grand. Is that the number that we're kicking around?
Correct.
And what are we proposing to do with that if it's not to support events and festivals and grants? My theory is we're probably the least efficient place to make decisions and make donations to support the community. If it's actually some sort of charitable donation, our taxpayers are best served to hold on to that money and make those donations as they see fit. And I don't even have any idea where we would put it if we didn't spend it as we've described it here with events and festivals.
I guess my suggestion, and if I'm reading correctly from my conversation with Councillor Nishikawa earlier this week, Bracebridge in particular has put away $40,000. I believe Huntsville's put away money, and I know Gravenhurst as well. So call it community events, call it community grants, festivals, or whatever, but I think we're expanding that terminology, and our grants committee could potentially look at allowing COVID-related items. Maybe some of that money does go to the food bank specifically and people with specific COVID requests. I think we're almost earmarking the money, and then as required, we would potentially through that grants committee hand out the money if somebody has a need for it. So Councillor Evers, did you have another comment or question, or is just your hand still up? Nope, there we go, the hand's down. Does anybody else want to chime in on this? Okay, I'm not sure I've got clear direction right now to, do we leave it in? Do we leave it in with an earmark for potentially adding COVID-related items to it? Anybody want these two items removed from the budget right now? Let me ask that much. If you want to, no, we're going to leave the $40,000 in between the two items. Councillor Jaglowitz, you have a question?
No, I had requested that it be left in, but at 20,000 rather than 40.
Okay. Councillor Kelley, I think seconds that. Councillor Hayes, you want to comment?
If we're just going to spend it on community events, I would not support it. If we're going to redirect it to COVID, I will support it.
Okay, so I think we're adding COVID-related things. Right now, the question is, and I'm going to try and phrase this a little bit, who would like the $40,000 reduced to $20,000 right now? I know that Councillor Jaglowitz and Councillor Kelley and Councillor Zavitz are the three people So that will not pass. So from a $40,000 being left in the budget, are we okay to just leave it currently and then add potentially some COVID-related support out of these two categories and combining them? Generally, anybody have opposition to that? Councillor Jaglowitz, comment or just you're against that anything related to COVID? Okay, so that's fine. So that again passes. We're going to leave $40,000 in the budget. The one item that we talked about, and that's Bala Cranberry Festival at the 12,650. I think the idea is that is earmarked for Cranberry Festival. If Cranberry Festival obviously is not going forward, then that money is not donated and given to Bala Cranberry Festival. Does anybody want to, in advance of them canceling the festival, pull the money out of our budget and make it not available? Councillor Hayes, a comment?
Yeah, our normal contribution to them goes forward. This was for an additional $12,600 for this year to put in more programming, and I think enhance their parking areas. I don't think we should be making that request available to them at this time. I'm pretty sure that if it goes forward, it'll go forward on I don't think we'll get the 20,000 people that we've had in the past. So I don't think that they need to add new programs at this time.
Okay, I'm going to actually get our communications officer, Corey Moore, to speak to this because he knows specifically what this 12.5 or 12.650 is. Corey?
Hello, can you hear me? So the 12.5 for the Bala Cranberry Festival isn't for any new programming related to the festival itself. We had included that as a line item this year to help recognize some of the offsetting costs that we provide to the festival to support it. And these include providing services such as picnic tables, garbage cans, barricades on the leading up to and after the festival itself. I know staff did note in the draft budget the offsetting cost recoveries that we receive from the festival aren't included in that number. I think staff may remember this year we did collect cost recoveries for garbage collection services on the weekend. And I know those cost recoveries are reflected in the department budgets themselves that relate to that area. And I know staff moving forward plan to continue to make improvements in that area so it's easier to understand moving forward.
Okay, thank you. As you answered that, it seemed almost confusing to me that the 12.5 wasn't in the budget last year, but it is in the budget this year because we recognize certain costs. But it actually does seem to kind of a new money going to the festival.
It's, I guess this would be the first year where we've actually categorized it into one area. Before it would be reflected in each individual department's budget, those services.
Okay, so appreciate that we were giving before, so we're just identifying specifically. Councillor Edwards, you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. I would leave it in at this point, even if it's it goes on a lower scale, like it's just money saved afterwards. So because, you know, if this does come around and we can have it, I think some people would like to celebrate a little bit, so they may just come up in that time. So I would leave it in at this point.
Okay, and if the festival doesn't go forward, obviously we are not giving them that money.
Exactly.
So, okay, anybody have a differing opinion right now on that want that money removed? Okay, let's move on. We have an operating grant to the chamber for $27,000. Does anybody want that grant removed? Guess what? We're leaving 27 grand in for the chamber. Madam Clerk, you're good with that. The second half of that is our visitor center, and that was to manage the Port Carling Visitor Center. And questions for Council Committee? Do we want to retain the $20,000 there? We've earmarked already, we may not even give them the visitor center because it's a $2,500 holding place for us to move the kiosk over there. Where are we at? Anybody want to chime in on our Port Carling Visitor Center? Everyone's afraid. Oh, sorry, Ruth. Thank you. Go ahead, Ruth. Just let her unmute. There we go. Go, Ruth.
sorry, I don't, so far I'm having from other councillors, and what I don't believe that people, even if we allow things to happen, I don't think people are going to come. Every time I'm hearing from folks is that in fact they have no intention of being around people for a year. So I think that this is the fact. Think that we're going to have a lot of visitors coming to this location, I believe is wrong. My opinion, but apparently most have a different opinion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mazan.
Sorry, clarification through you, your worship. Is this $20,000 just for the Port Carling kiosk, or is this for the Bala and Port Carling kiosk?
So from a clarification perspective, and this goes back to some history, we decided to add a Port Carling visitor center many, many years ago, and the chamber was staffing up to manage that. And basically, that's what that $20,000. It is really associated with the Port Carling Visitor Center and only that.
So and I guess this should be then connected with that other $2,500 that we have set aside.
Well, potentially that's on the question whether or not we want to have a Port Carling Visitor Center at this point. So
none of that money impacts then I just want to be sure I'm clear. None of that $20,000 impacts the Bala Visitor Center.
Correct.
Okay.
There's two offers. There's two things. There's one sort of a fee for service, which is the $20,000 at the end. And that fee for service is to manage the Port Carling Visitor Center. And if I go back in history, and Councillor Hayes and Edwards and I think it was about 8 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, that we decided to open a Port Carling Visitor Center. We had our own staff managing it, but we decided to let the chamber manage it for some consistency of messaging. And we gave them a fee for service at the time. I think it started at one point, it was as low as $13,000, but it's been creeping up and changing up. So that's what the fee for service in particular with Port Carling is. Okay. Councillor Kelley. Supplemental.
So supplemental, I guess the real question being asked of us taking money right outside of this is, do we believe that we need to have a kiosk in Port Carling this summer, and what does it look like? And if we can answer those two questions, then it might dictate how much money we would set aside for that. Is that correct?
That would be 100% correct. And I'll provide my comments after. Councillor Kelley.
Thank you. I'm of the mind that we won't get the traffic this year to justify $20,000, and that we ought to cut it just for this year, not necessarily permanently. And maybe I'll keep going down there and telling people where to go on weekends. And
maybe your daughter can help. We'll get child labor. Councillor Bridgman.
Well, yes, if we're chiming in on this right now, I see letting this go for a year. I don't see spending this money. I think it's an extra. So that's my vote.
Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you. I too think this is something we can safely remove. I think the chamber can provide whatever services out of their Bala area, but I'd like to make it clear that I do support chamber activities, and that this removal is in no way reducing our support to them. This is just something they won't have to do, so they'll be cost neutral on it.
100%. Thank you. And I would agree again. I think tourism itself this year, as I mentioned earlier, will certainly be down and off. And I would support Councillor Nishikawa. Are people going to travel inside? I don't know what tourism is going to look like. And let's respect our seasonal residents and get them up here and enjoying what Muskoka has to offer who don't use our visitor centers. And this is a one-time this year, understanding that we'll probably be certainly underutilized in this visitor center. So it's probably an okay to remove the visitor center. Does anybody have a differing opinion on removing this $20,000 at this time? Okay, so Madam Clerk and Mr. CIO, I think we're good to remove the $20,000, and there would be a corresponding $2,500 reduction from the kiosk. as well. Okay, great. Julie, I think you're keeping track, plus and minus as we move forward. Let's go to the last page of our option 2 program area. We have a $35,000 grant to the Muskoka Lakes Museum. Anybody want to comment on this? I see Councillor Jagowitz's hand is up. That may be up from last time, or you want to comment first, Frank? Oh, you're still on mute, or you just muted your, Frank? There we go, one more time. There we
Okay,
go.
actually, you're correct. It was up from last time, but I do support keeping this in. And I think if their activities are reduced, that's okay. I think we should support this organization.
Okay, Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Your Worship. It was just a question of clarification. I think we need to support it, but that 35,000, is that all operating expenses, even if we don't have any visit, even if it can't be opened yet? I'm just a little unclear on that part.
I think we could potentially in the comment, and let's say that the visitor center did not open this summer, that $35,000 would be carried over into 2021. It'd be earmarked here, but we would short them, I hate to say short them, but for next year, or prorated appropriately going forward. So I think that's a good answer. Councillor Kelley?
Yeah, and I just wanted to comment that the museum does good work with our heritage, our archives. So there's an ongoing cost to maintain the infrastructure and the artifacts, notwithstanding that it may or may not be attractive under a COVID environment to bring people into it. So I support keeping this in the budget.
Councillor Mazan, another comment? We need you to unmute your microphone, Councillor Mazan. Thank you.
Sorry. Question, actually. So is that $35,000 for operating costs then? Is that what helps keep the lights on? Or is it maybe somebody could just walk me through what that $35,000 usually is used for?
We'll go to Corey, I think, specifically. We're just trying to pull up some notes. I see some staff nodding their heads around, or clerk was nodding. But I think it's operating. It's their request to, if my memory serves me correctly, there's some staff implications in there, their curator, some hydro costs, some marketing costs. It's in overall so they can balance their books, that they need an operating grant from the township. And I think we were at 35 grand last year, were we not? So level, same financing as we did last year. Does that answer enough? You good?
Yes, so then I support the idea.
Anybody disagree and think that 35 grand should be coming out at this particular point? I think I'm getting pretty much general consensus that we all think we should keep the 35 grand in. Okay, Madam Clerk. Commissioner Stevens, 35 grand. The operating grants to the libraries at $6,000. I'm going to actually turn to Councillor Hayes, I think, in particular, and maybe comment on this one, if I may, as we had a discussion last evening.
This is for the matching funds that the 2 libraries generate during the year. And for every dollar they raise in funds, they ask the township to match. Normally, this runs between $2,200 and $2,700 a year. I don't think that they are going to see the traffic. They both reside within community centers, which are now shut down. I think that if we said to them this year, we're only going to give you, say, $1,000 each, I think that would cover their costs, because they have no operating costs other than the purchase of books and DVDs. And if they're not being used, then they're not being purchased. So I think that if we went from $6,000 to $2,000, I think that would be more than adequate for this year.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Roberts?
I support the comments that were just made. I did talk to the Milford Bay Library, and they leave it to council, and they said they could survive this year, but they thought the $1,000 would be appreciated.
Okay, anybody have a differing opinion that we would lower that to $1,000 each? Okay, so that would be a $4,000 reduction in particular. However, I want you all just to think for a second, because we're going to talk about our next line item, and that's a grant to South Muskoka Hospital. And I'm actually going to recommend my suggestion that the $4,000 we just saved there gets put down to the hospital. I think it's a great suggestion to show our community, to show our hospitals, to show our frontline workers, everybody, that we understand the additional stresses that they've been put on through COVID. For the extra few $1,000s, it's just a nice benefit to move that number up a little bit to $13,000. I'll put that to the floor. Councillor Jaglowitz wanted to chime in.
Yes, I did. Thank you. I would like staff to explain exactly where that 9,000 goes to, what organization. Is it the hospital or a foundation, and what is it used for? And then I'd like to comment on the answer.
Okay. Who wants to comment on that? Okay, Corey.
Thank you. The money is provided in matching dollars to the South Muskoka Hospital Foundation. Every year they again raise money in the community, and we match it up to $9,000.
If I may, do you know what we had to provide last year? What the actual number was in the matching?
9,000.
So they're getting more than the $9,000. Thank you.
So may I then comment? That's what I thought it was. I'm of the view that the township shouldn't be providing funds in that fashion in any event. So I would suggest that that be removed.
Okay, so Councillor Jaglowitz would like the $9,000 removed. We'll leave my additional top up on that. I'm going to put this to Council right now. Does anybody want that money removed? The matching funds, the community says we're going to put $9,000 in and we match the funds. So does anybody want this removed from the budget? Okay. And it goes into capital purchases of the hospital, I'm advised. I see shaking of head. Councillor Edwards, you want to leave this in the budget at $9,000 right now? Okay. Everybody else want to leave the $9,000 in it at minimum? I'll suggest that right now. Councillor Bridgman, Councillor Hayes, Councillor Mazan, yes. Councillor Roberts, yes. Councillor Edwards, certainly yes. Councillor Zavitz is yes. So I think we're going to leave the $9,000 in. Thank you. The next question I'll ask is, again, we took some money out of the other grants. Do we want to potentially top this up, and understanding that it's been done and maxed out in other years at 9,000? Can we demonstrate some support for our hospitals by adding an extra few $1,000s that we just saved in the line item before? Councillor Hayes?
That $9,000 grant, I believe, is for capital purchases. If we were going to give the hospital the extra $4,000 we're saving from the libraries, I would like to see that go directly to the hospital for the purchases of PPEs and wherever they feel that it's necessary for operating expenses.
Councillor Edwards.
I would support putting the extra 4,000 in and make it up to 13,000, because this is hard times and we can show that we're supporting the hospital.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in on this particular right now? Councillor Hayes wants the $4,000 to be put into a special fund, if you will, for PPE equipment. Councillor Edwards says, let's put it into our capital equipment. And again, it's a matching funds. So that $4,000, just remember, becomes $8,000 with community support versus just a $4,000. So I actually like it in the matching funds comment. Councillor Kelley.
I'm just struggling a little bit. I mean, we're talking about actually making a donation to a hospital that's already funded by the province, right? So it's the taxpayer paying the tax. No, what am I missing?
So what we realize is we watch through regular fundraising campaigns that our hospitals across the province are significantly underfunded, and that the internal capital equipment is purchased by the community. So I know about a month and a half ago, some seasonal residents donated $130,000 to buy some additional infrastructure stuff because the hospital has need. I'm not sure whether individual councillors today have seen it or not, but I know that our hospital foundations continue to search for funding for capital expenditures, a CAT scan machine, new ICU beds, those kinds of things that the province does not fund. So that's where.
And my problem my problem is that I want that hospital to be as well equipped as possible. I live here and I'll need it eventually. But I think the least efficient way from a tax and other perspective to fund that thing is to fund it through, a municipality or through the township. I mean, I hate to sound like it's easy to spend other people's money. If it's only 13 grand, I guess it just doesn't make any sense to me that we're transferring tax money we take from taxpayer here over to a hospital that the taxpayer is going to be funding anyhow. And they can, if our taxpayers decide to make the donation directly, at least they get tax relief. We don't get that.
So certainly appreciate it. And that's always been the delicate balance, if you will, between what we do. They have come, and I don't think they came in the last year and a half, but they have come, the Hospital Foundation, to this council asking for some specific funding. And what we determined a number of years ago was that the funding we would provide would be in match funding. So the community wants to put some money forward, we would match that so it ends up in double dollars. And I think that's the idea. That's why we have $9,000 in the budget. So Councillor Edwards and myself believe that we could potentially right now, as we've seen some savings, to increase that to $13,000, but the $4,000 is a budget neutral item at this particular point. Anybody else want to chime in? Councillor Jaglowitz wants to chime in, and then Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you. In the debate, Mr. Mayor, between yourself and Councillor Kelley, I support Councillor Kelley's position. You refer to the 135,000 that some cottagers or people donated, but they got a tax receipt for that. I think that's the proper way. I think if we wanted to have an item in our budget, which would have through communications to encourage taxpayers to donate and support hospital activities, I would support that. But as far as us making taxpayers' money as a donation without a tax receipt, I think is fundamentally wrong.
Okay, I see Councillor Bridgman wants to chime in.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would like to leave it at the 9,000 level. I think this is one area we can not do extras this year, but I also agree with Councillor Kelley and Jaglowitz, excuse me, and what they were saying. So I'm good with leaving it where it is. I'll just let you know that.
Okay. So I'm getting a general sense, and there's no disagreement, Councillor Kelley and Councillor Jaglowitz, that ideally people donate individually and get their individual tax receipt. The hospital specifically came to us and said, we would like your help and your support. I'm sensing, and I'll be honest with you, I would take the $4,000 off the table. I thought it was a nice show of faith to them that based on COVID times, we're trying to extra support them. But I think to potentially remove some support, we may be shooting ourselves in the foot. So I'm going to ask, at the $9,000, how many people would be in favor of leaving it at $9,000 today? Maybe just a quick show of hands so I can see those there. My hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're going to leave it at $9,000 at this particular point and in the budget. So thank you very much, and I appreciate that. The other Habitat for Humanity, the $20,000 we verbally took out about a week ago, and that's also because that program's not going forward, I believe. So there's no point in putting money aside, I believe. Councillor Hayes has commented on that. So anybody have a differing opinion that we want to put 20,000 into a budget that's not going to go forward? I think we're good to take that one out. And then also the electronic wait list, the $2,000. We had talked about removing that a week ago. Anybody have a differing opinion at that point? Okay, so we're good there. Maybe I'm just going to have a quick pause. Commissioner Stevens, have you been doing some running math along here? I'm sure you have. And wondering where, with some of the cuts that we've made to our operating budget, we started this exercise right now, all things being considered, at 4.57. And what have we sort of taken out of, what's the dollar amount we've taken out of the budget so far?
Thank you. The dollar amount is $152,800. And there was a couple things I just wanted to confirm. So the visitor kiosk was originally that is out, correct?
Yes.
I think that was the main one that I wanted to make sure. And so, yeah, we're 152,800. That is a levy increase of 3.3% over the previous year.
Okay.
And so that translates to $11.33 on a $500,000 property. And from a tax rate perspective, sorry, hang on a second. It will actually translate into a reduction in the tax rate. Sorry, trying to read my chart here. Hang on a second.
You need my abacus?
No, hang on. Do I need your abacus? No, I don't need your abacus, but I'm trying to figure out if my schedule is correct here when we were. Okay, I can't figure out the tax rate just yet, but stay tuned and I'll grab that one. But for the purposes of for where you are right now, you're at 152,800.
Okay.
Reduction.
Thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz, you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I do. I've been doing some calculating also as an accountant. I think Commissioner Stevens and I have the same basic degree, although hers is probably more current than mine. At the beginning of my remarks, I asked for inflation plus cost of living, 1.42 plus 1.9, which equaled 3.32. Commissioner Stevens says we're at 3.3. I'm happy. I don't think we have to do anything with the next two items. Thank you.
Okay, appreciate that. And I do appreciate that that we have made some significant reductions to get to 3.3. I think we do need to understand a little bit about the next two items in particular, and I just to comment, they are significant, and our staff have done the work to understand them. So the first item is that of cost of living, and again, we have a policy here at the Township of Muskoka Lakes that our staff annually would receive a cost of living increase. And so that would be that number, which comes out to 1.9%. So we can still meet Councillor Jaglowitz 3.2% or 3.3% by including that. The market compensation review, again, is a number that's we as council approved a number of months ago before COVID impact. And just as a high level, what we realized that many of our staff and our senior staff in particular are sort of underpaid compared to their peers, and we were trying to not give them a raise, but just get them back into market level. One of the things that I want to throw out to council, because I really do believe we need to recognize our staff fully. And just a suggestion for council, I mean, we can leave it as it is, which is staff's recommendation and what council had prior approval, but maybe as a option for council to consider, recognizing COVID, recognizing different times. What if we didn't implement that market compensation review and the adjustments accordingly until July 1st? So basically, we're going to save half the year, and we put staff and say, you're going to be compensated as of July 1st with this budget. Anybody have a comment, or do we want to leave it as it is as recommended today? I don't see any hands going up, so I can leave it as it is. I just was trying. Councillor Jaglowitz wanted to comment first of all, and then Councillor Nishikawa, and then Councillor Kelley.
Yes, I did, Mr. Mayor. I really thank you for that suggestion. So I won't ask the question, but correct me if you can staff can correct me if I'm wrong. So this would have been a retroactive salary increase back to the 1st of January, if that's the understanding. And if that is so, then I would certainly support a deferral to July 1st of that implementation, since we're almost there now.
Thank you. Councillor Nishikawa.
I have a real struggle with this, and in fact, I like your things forward to June, but in fact, I believe it should be October. And it has nothing to do with the quality of staff. I'm around some of those high taxpayers that are really, really challenged even being able to pay their taxes this year. So I can't support what is being brought forward right now.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelley.
Thank you. And I better say this before I say what I have to say. I love the staff. They're doing a terrific job, and every encounter I have is very professional, very positive. I want to understand first the cost of living increase. You mentioned it's tied to policy. Is it so it's the year prior, 12 months ended December 31, gets adjusted for the following year? Is that how it works?
Okay, I'll get Human Resources, Sarah, if you want to comment on that, where our policy states.
Hi, thank you. The policy talks about the Statistics Canada Consumer Price Index at January of the current year.
For that year then, okay.
Yeah.
So this presumably has already or should have already taken place. And it's a matter of policy, it's an understanding. I mean, I'm not being stupid. I'm trying to ask, does this work both ways? Does cost of living decrease, a recessionary period, impact the salary negatively on the following year?
Sarah, I think the answer to that's no.
Yeah, I'm guessing.
I think is your question then, yeah, so then the percentage changes based on the year.
But I would argue that since February 28th or 29th this year, our cost of living, our consumer price index has been negative. I don't know that the numbers are out, but I can tell you when they do come out, they will be negative, and presumably for the balance of the year. And I would think that means by natural extension of the policy for next year, you're looking at negative salary increases. And I just don't know how the policy deals with that.
I'm going to guess, and I hear from our CIO at that point, it may be a zero number. I'm not sure that we could theoretically say we paid you $1 today and you're only getting 90 cents tomorrow because of whatever happens. You know, some people's cost of living goes up 4%, some people goes up 1%, and that's sort of our existing policy. I do know also that some staff follow this. We have some others with various sort of union affiliations that would have already received their cost of living increase.
I understand that. I understand that.
I think to be equal, we probably need to follow this particular policy on the cost of living specifically.
The second thing is the market compensation assessment. I really don't have any choice but to revert to my training and my understanding, admittedly, in the private industry. The market right now is it's an employer's market, and it's only going to get worse. And I quite frankly think we have come through a period of tremendous prosperity and very low unemployment. Last year, it was impossible for most of our commercial constituents to find people to work in their stores. And that's when you really need to step up and prime the pump with retention and retention bonuses to keep people around. I don't believe that that is prudent or wise or something that we should be doing this year on the market compensation piece.
Councillor Kelley, I'll just ask a question specifically. And again, you're vocal on this. So 2 months ago, our council approved a market compensation review for the year of 2020 to our staff to say, we want to pay you according to your peers. If we had passed our budget in January, which was our original plan, or early February, we would have paid a full year of this market compensation because that's what we had approved as our council. Comment?
I understand, but I mean, somebody mentioned a minute ago Huntsville. I think maybe your worship, it was you in reference to the, and I was looking, but I couldn't find it. My recollection is in the last 7 days, Huntsville has frozen and reduced salaries. It has frozen hiring. It has taken some pretty dramatic steps to reflect the new reality. We're in very challenging times. We don't feel it today, but I can tell you we're in the middle of it. We just won't know it until another 30 or 60 days passes. And I understand that it was adopted by council. I'm not going to give you any legal opinions, but I suppose if it was rolled out and made part of the employment relationship with our employees at the time, with staff at the time, possibly I'm not going to feed that argument, but I would understand there may be an argument there. If it's still an open issue, and if we're still trying to meet market, not meet market, but if we're trying to meet the market, then quite honestly, the market has changed so dramatically in the last 45 days. I feel no need to I don't even, it's not a matter of my need. The fact of the matter is market compensation review done today when we're looking at this for approval in the budget would tell me that it's not a necessary move. We've met market because the market came to us.
Okay, so I appreciate those comments and duly noted. I will say the Huntsville, it was their seasonal employees and their part-time employees that they theoretically let go because of their programming related elements, not their full-time staff. And our market compensation review in particular was to our full-time staff. Unless 6 months from now, a year from now, if we do this market compensation review, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we're going to see the Director of Public Works at Bracebridge and the Director in Huntsville and all of our market comparators saying we now pay less money to those particular staff. This is not really a supply and demand market driven perspective. We have services to deliver, and our comparator group is the one who said this is where we're at. I will tell you from my own personal experience, and one of the most frustrating things, and it's also great. The woman behind the biggest input to our budget this year, Commissioner Stevens at the District of Muskoka, used to be our treasurer and moved on for bigger and better things, partly because of additional pay. The future CAO at Bracebridge was their Director of Finance, was Commissioner Stevens at Muskoka Lake's successor, and left here because of additional opportunities and a different financial structure at other things. So I think to retain talent, and I think we may be short-sighted, I believe, if we cannot recognize our staff for truly the value they do. And we all worry about it, where we talk about budgets and is it right and is it wrong and where we've been. And we lose one senior staff to continuity. The opportunity cost, I think, is significant. I fully appreciate personally the financials that we're in and where we're at. And I think that's why I would suggest that we would implement this market compensation review, not for the full year, but for a half a year, which immediately saves $39,000 out of our bottom line in particular, and still respects our staff as the backbone. I'll go to Councillor Bridgman first of all, and then Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Kelley, I understand what you're saying, but that's the private sector industry we're talking about. And I don't believe that our competitors who are municipal employee, it's the municipal governments up here, are going to cut their staff salaries very much. So I think we have to stay competitive. We're having trouble getting senior staff and keeping them. So I actually support Mayor Harding's suggestion that it gets implemented July 1st rather than the beginning of the year.
Councillor Zavitz, I saw your hand up. It's down again, but you want to chime in?
Yes, thank you. And certainly through you, Chair, I certainly support Councillor Kelley and his comments. The first item on the chart when we started today was to remove the compensation so in a like fashion, remove the compensation that council voted for themselves. That was easy to do. And I think that in like fashion, again, going to keep reminding everyone of these times. And it's nothing to do with the quality of our staff. We have a wonderful staff. And I don't even think it's looking down the road to retention. You mentioned some analogies, Mayor, to, for example, Ms. Stevens, well, when she did what she didn't do it in COVID times. And again, I'm going to keep trying to bring us back to that. That's my only real thought. And that I think that while we voted for additional benefits for council back then, to your point, there's no reason why we couldn't review that here and now and take a different position. So I hear everyone, but I just think in these times, there's a sensitivity here that we could really pay attention to for our taxpayers.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to chime in because I misunderstood your earlier recommendation. I thought I heard you say that you would recommend phasing in the salary increases and have them effective July 1st. And I interpreted that to mean both the market value and the cost of living, because I had lost sight of the fact that this is a retroactive pay increase to our employees. And so therefore, I supported you on the market value, but I also would suggest that it should affect to the cost of living also. And I think that's not a permanent thing. That's just a very small recognition that times have changed, but that we still value our employees and we're going to bring them where we think they should be. But maybe they just feel a slight amount of the pain that everybody else out there is. And also on the fact that I believe all of the permanent employees have retained their positions while many others aren't. So I would hope you'd amend that to apply the July 1st implementation to both of those items, the cost of living and the market compensation.
Okay, appreciate that comment. Anybody else feel free to chime in. Councillor Hayes.
Yes, I think that the cost of living expenses should be retroactive to January 1st. And I believe that we are losing money in advertising, in time lost, replacing people that have moved. And I can tell you, sitting in a position in the municipal government, seeing yourself very underpaid and considering moving to someplace else, the money does make a difference. And I will support a July 1st implementation of the market compensation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Roberts.
I too believe that we need to match the market for our staff. We have troubles getting good staff. We have good staff. We don't. The CAO will take care of that. So I'm supportive of a July 1st compensation, not retroactive. But on the cost of savings, retroactive.
Right, on the cost of living. Okay, correct. And which is according to our policy. Any other comments? Oh, Ruth, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to mention to council, in my experience, also from the year 2000, every municipality that I've been experienced with has the same staff dues that we do. It's very competitive. All you have to look at is the job boards that we see through municipal board or world and all of that type of thing. We're not unique. We beat ourselves up. And I don't think that's right. It is focused constantly. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Mazan.
Thank you, and through you. I'd like to support the idea of the July 1st for the market compensation review and retroactive for the cost of living. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to try and just get a bit of a straw poll here. I think I have a direction to which way we're going. And I want to say, just as we do this, one of the things that's interesting, and I hear that we're all in difficult times and many people are struggling, but it's kind of like saying, okay, so all those people who are working overtime producing PPE equipment to supply, because the rest of the world's unemployed, they should take a reduction in pay. And that's not what we're about here. We are fortunate that we have some staff that can continue to work and supply. We have a policy in place. And I think that's the one question. So I think from a delivering of that policy is what we would hopefully want to do. And so I'm going to just try and do these two in specific. There's a cost of living increase right now at 1.9% on the books. The staff recommendation is that that would be implemented as per our policy, and that would be retroactive back to January 1st. Again, understanding that some of our staff, based on where they fit in an organization with certain unions, et cetera, have already received that. So we may be causing a difficulty within our own staff organization if we choose not to implement that all the way back to January 1st. So as a just a straw poll, how many people would be in favor of that staying in the budget and going back to January 1st for an implementation, the cost of living increase? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Am I correct on that, Madam Clerk? Keep your hands up if we can. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so we're going to leave that in the budget. Thank you very much. The second one is the market compensation review. And the idea on the table was originally to go to the full year. And I'll ask that question first and foremost, and then we'll go to potentially a half-year question if that one doesn't pass. How many people would like the market compensation review to be retroactive back to January? Anybody in favor of that for the full year market compensation? Okay, anybody, let me ask now from a implementation of that based on council's decision prior, and that is to go to July 1st implementation on market compensation. I'm in favor of that. So that's the July 1st. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Madam Clerk, 7. Okay, and then again, that is carried forward. So thank you. Go to Commissioner Stevens one more time, and she's probably got a tax rate done. So I think the only change that we've made from our 3.3 is removing roughly $39,000 in round numbers out of the market compensation. And where are we at?
So that takes us to 191,800 from what was proposed. And so the increase year over year is 2.97% on the levy. And it's a $9.38 increase for a $500,000 property. And the tax rate will actually drop by 0.63%. So that's just the rate, right? So that includes all of the changes in assessment and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you. So Commissioner, maybe one question I can ask, because I know this has been a common question from council's perspective and the public's perspective. So if I read the operating budget from last year and where we were at and our 2020 budget, and I appreciate we had some actuals, but we put a bunch more money into reserves. All things being equal from last year, the amount of money we levied $12,577,051. Based on the current 2.97% increase, what number would we be levying this year, if I may? Or no, sorry, that's 2019 budget to actuals. We did 12.7, we now did 13.2. So where are we? Sorry, I picked the wrong number from the column. Where are we at from the levy perspective in dollars and cents to say, last year we levied 12.7?
It's, 12.027, I think. Just clarifying there, right? 12,027,806 was what was levied last year. And with the changes that council's considering, it would move to 12,385,000. So 12,385,251.
Okay, so if I wanted to have a 0% change financially between last year's levy and this year's levy, what number, how much more money do we have to find? It's a roughly $300,000, correct?
You need to find 357,445.
Okay, 357. Thank you. Councillor Zavitz, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair, through you. I wonder if it's relevant at this point in time. Do we have a sense of where the township is Jan, Feb, March, so for the first quarter of 2020? How are we tracking? I haven't heard that number yet. How are we doing, given that there was no budget to even aim for? How is our spending? Where are we to some sense of where we might be, or is that relevant in this discussion as we go forward? Thank you.
Do you want to try and tackle that one as you've looked at some numbers, or I can look to our CIO potentially?
So I have not looked at, I focused only on the budget. So I was not, I have not looked at your numbers, but I can tell you that it would likely be fairly similar to the first quarter of the previous year. You've not added any staff with the exception of your manager of taxation, which you got pre-approval to do. The one thing I will say is that the deferral of the waiving of the penalties did impact, obviously, the revenue generation for April in particular. And so that would, I think we've determined that was a decrease from what we would normally experience by about 38,000.
Okay.
But that's the only information I have.
Okay. Any other comments? So Councillor Zavitz again. Follow up.
Thank you, Your Worship. I find that answer very disturbing. If this were my company, it would be different. Thank you.
Councillor Kelley.
Just, I wanted to make sure I understood what Mr. Stevens said. Is it close to the expense line for last year or close to the budget for last year?
So
what are we tracking
my
against?
contract with you was to do the budget, not to look at the first quarter results. I have no idea where your first quarter results are. I'm not part of the contract.
And I'm just, if I may,
can somebody transfer me then?
So I just want to remind council, and I appreciate Councillor Zavitz's questions. Remember, we have an acting treasurer who also happens to be our CAO, who's also managing his way through COVID times. And for those of you, I know every single person on this Zoom call has probably in the last 2 weeks spent at least 1 hour or more on the telephone with said CAO. So there are only so many hours in a day for our CAO to actually provide the super details that we may or may not want. We are in the process. They've also been interviewing for a new treasurer at the same time so that we're not in these problems going forward. So I appreciate the comment. I want to just personally thank our CAO for doing beyond double duty at this particular time. And Councillor Zavitz, you have another quick comment?
Thank you, Your Worship. I certainly echo your comments. My concern is this is a 6-month predicament, and here we are.
Councillor Kelley.
Just, I think the CAO knows how much I feel for him, and I think he's doing a tremendous job. But to minimize the results through the first quarter, as I think you just called them, explicit detail or something, it's a pretty fundamental number. And it's a curiosity. Before we set the budget, we have the luxury of having already 1/3 of the year passed. I don't expect the last month's numbers to be in, but if we had a sense that the first quarter tracked close to last year, or close to last year's budget or whatever, it would give me some comfort to know that we were doing the right thing with this budget.
Okay, so what I understand, first of all, is before we adopt our budget, which would be scheduled potentially for our next council meeting on the 13th of May, we could provide all of those specific details as to where we are. I think Commissioner Stevens commented that based on everything she's seen, we would be on track to where we were last year for our first quarter spend. There's nothing irregular that would have gone on. Councillor Hayes?
Yes, I don't think you're going to see what you're looking for in that first quarter, because departments are sitting back waiting for the budget to be passed to do their purchasing that they would normally have done if we had passed the budget in January or February. So what you're going to see is wages and benefits and costs that are spread out through the year. You're not going to see the spending. So even if you looked at that first quarter, you wouldn't have an idea of what we're actually would have spent had the budget passed in January or February.
Okay, thank you for that. I have a question specifically for council. So right now we are at a 2.97% increase over last year. And again, it's budget to budget, yes. And basically it's the amount of money we have levied. And I want to look at it that way specifically. We overinflated, if you will, some departmental, but it went into reserves, which we appreciate because we have a, right now the 10-year capital forecast, as I mentioned, says we're putting $39 million into reserves. The simple question, and again, if I go back to a week ago, I had some councillors who wanted a negative budget number. Some councillors were okay with a 4.57% number. We have got to a 2.7 without touching anything in reserves. We have made some cuts specifically to some of the, I'll call it programming, or we've looked at some things to reduce our costs specifically. Generally speaking, would council at this point, and I'll kind of go, and I'm going to work my way around and just kind of get a nodding of heads as I call your name. Would you like to go further? I know there was a lot of discussion to try and get to a 0% increase. Or are we okay right now generally at a 2.97, or would you like to go a little bit deeper? And I can make some recommendations how we may do that. Councillor Roberts, where are you? Do you want to go a little deeper, or are you generally okay at 2 points? So you're good at 2.97. Thank you very much. Councillor Mazan, where are you at this? Do you want to go a little bit deeper, or are you generally okay at 2.97?
I would like to go a little deeper, please.
Thank you. Councillor Kelley?
Deeper, I want to go for 0.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards?
I would leave it at that. I think we've done a very good job, and you're just going to hurt yourself if you go any deeper. I would leave it the way it is. People that I've talked to, and I've talked to quite a few, they were happy with what it was. So I think we've done good, and I would leave it at that. I would not go any further. I would not support it.
Okay. Councillor Hayes?
Okay. If you consider that the cost of living is 1.9, if you take 2.9 minus 1.9, we've increased the budget by 1%. I'm very happy with that. And I would support it at this time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bridgman?
I would prefer to go a little bit deeper, so I would like to see your thoughts on that, please.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz?
Thank you. I'm comfortable with the operating side, but I have some comments on the reserves and capital side once you finish this. So I hope we're not going to ignore that.
Thank you. Councillor Zavitz?
0.
You're going to 0, okay. And finally, Councillor Nishikawa? You want to go deeper?
I'm not happy with the budget as it is, so I don't even know what direction to go because some of my other comments haven't made any sense for anybody else. So,
okay, thank you. So generally speaking, I'm going to say we're sort of split between where we are right now at 2.9 and split to going to deeper. And I think the number for deeper is generally a 0% increase if I read the tea leaves appropriately. And I just want to float something by council at this particular point, because I actually, if I was to vote at the current level right now, I think we would probably pass at the current level, but I would like to potentially float an idea that gets us to a 0. And my question for Julie, we're about $350,000 above last year's budget as a actual dollar amount. And knowing that we are putting away $39 million over the next 10 years into reserves, my simple suggestion would be at this point, if we want to get to a 0, would be to reduce the contribution to reserves this year roughly by about $300,000. That doesn't, we could theoretically double dip and double pay it back immediately next year. But if I look at this being a time to save and not, or sorry, not a time to save in our general personal accounts, we're going to be using some of our savings to survive, and in a bit greater times and more economic boom, we would put some money away for a rainy day. If we had to pay back theoretically that $300,000 reduction, then we would put away $30,000 more a year going forward. And knowing that we would have to do that. Generally, again, if we took out in round numbers $30,000 or $300,000 out of the contribution to reserves, yes, we are slightly shorting ourselves this year, but we certainly get to a 0% budget increase, dollar for dollar, year over year, and we can easily accommodate over $39 million being put away into reserves over the next 10 years, making back up that $300,000. Anybody want to comment on that as a potential strategy to get to zero at this point? Councillor Jaglowitz, I love it. Your hand is always up first. The accountant in you. Your microphone, Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hope you'll take my comment as a friendly comment. That's the way it's intended. Your logic is not correct. If we cut $350,000 out of the contribution to reserves this year, that means it'll be cut out for each of the next 10 years. So adding 30,000 won't cut it. What we have to do is add 385,000 next year. Okay. So first of all, that's the first comment. The second one is, before we make any cut to the contribution to reserves, which really is a contribution to capital expenditures, it would be necessary, in my view, for staff to go back to the 10-year capital forecast and cut appropriate programs that would say that's sustainable. If not, we're passing a budget that doesn't fully fund our capital expenditures. That's my comment.
Okay. I see Councillor Kelley next.
Just a quick question. If we got it to zero through whatever means versus last year, what percentage does that involve? How much does our spending go up, actual out of pocket versus 2019, in order to get it just to break even at zero tax increase?
I don't actually understand what your question is.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand that or asked it. I want, instead of comparing budget to budget, I want to know what the new budget would look like if we made the change that Mayor Harding is suggesting versus last year actual on the total expenses.
Okay.
I still think we're spending far more money than we know we are.
So I think it's important to sort of look at the difference between because year over year things change, right? And so one of the things that we talked about, and I think showed in one of the commentaries that were attached maybe to your report, was the makeup of the differential between actuals and levy from last year, so 2019. And the biggest part was in your personnel numbers. And one of the most significant number was related to vacancies. And so when we go to budget, we obviously don't continue to budget vacancies. We assume those people are going to come into the organization. And so that was one of your biggest variances to budget last year. And then there was a couple others where revenues were fairly significantly increased over over what was the budget. And we've tried to mitigate those for sure in this budget, in the 2020 version. But so that was just commentary. But the one thing so right now, if you were to decrease your contributions to reserves by, and I've gone with the 350,000, and that takes you to a 0.06% increase year over year. So it's pretty close. It would take you to a 12,035,000, and versus the spend that we saw that's in the budget binder, because that's the latest information that I have. Sorry, I'm just typing in numbers as I'm speaking to you. The differential is it's pretty close to what it is right now. So it's 895,000.
On a base of 12 million.
So the difference between the levy that would be proposed versus what the actual were in 19 is just under, it's 895,000 difference. But again, what you really need to concentrate on is the individual parts of what that is made up of. So for example, you know, the category differences. So one, you know, the vacancies that were in last year, or sometimes the gapping when people are moving through, you know, someone starts at a band at a level and then the next year they have an increase, right? So all of those things, and that's in addition, that increase is in addition to the COLA and the market compensation review, right? That's just someone proceeding through the grid, as we call it. So we have to be really careful when you look at this. It's hard to just say, take last year and stick there, because there are differences year over year.
And I understand that. I mean, I would never just draw a strict comparison, but I think by looking year over year, budget versus budget, we ignore the fact that we came in well under budget last year. The service level was, I think, pretty terrific. I never heard anything to the contrary. We're not undertaking any big ambitious thing to, you know, spend no new big projects. There's a couple of things in there. And when you look at the percentage that we are taking up, this budget will allow us to take up the total expense line from last year's actual. We're way overspending. It's fortunately not our money, I guess. That's my concern. I understand we don't look at it that way. It takes a lot of explanation to get to that number, and that usually is a sign that there's a sensitive issue. It's a lot of money. We're big, huge. We're $895,000 on a base of,
right,
what is it, 12? I forget how many million.
Right. So I guess,
Okay.
Councillor Kelley, the comment being, you know, when we didn't have a manager of taxation and we do now, wasn't in the budget last year, and now we have increased funds to deliver that level of service, because we realize we need to deliver that level of service. It's hard to compare actuals, and when that position was vacant, or whatever the position was, right, we're difficult to compare some of those actuals. I think that's what sort of Julie's trying to highlight to us. For the number, and I'll say for myself, and as a responsible individual to our taxpayers' dollars, if we are to remove roughly $300,000, $350,000 out of our contribution to reserves this year, if we charged $1 last year, we're going to charge $1 this year. Factor in the education component is already going down. We know that. Factor in some of our district costs, as we know, are going down. And many of our taxpayers will actually have a negative tax bill this year. They will pay less this year than they will over. I think our CIO wants to chime in, if I may.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. To the councillor's point directly, I think that staff have acknowledged that, you know, you have three key new players, myself, the Director of Public Works, and the Fire Chief. We've gone and done a deep dive, and I think we've acknowledged through answers to public comments, as well as questions of councillors, that it appears that in certain areas in the operating budget, previously it may have been overstated. So we've gone through and done a deep dive and found cost savings, significant cost savings, which were redirected to reserves.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Roberts.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in no way favor of reducing the 4.5% levy and very much. I think we did spend a lot of time. We got down to a 2.whatever%, which, put it in layman's terms, is about $10 for 500,000 and $20 for $1 million on assessed value. $20 for $1 million assessed value place is the price of a large pizza. So I don't know why we're going to want to go any deeper. We're not here to really worry about the impact of COVID. Everyone around this table has lost significant money because of COVID. But I don't think we should go any deeper.
Thank you. So Councillor Jaglowitz, you've asked a bunch of questions. I'm going to go to some other councillors first. Councillor Edwards.
I agree with Councillor Roberts. I would not go and not below the 2.97. That's $9.38, and that's very, very good. I think we're being irresponsible if we go any lower, and I would not be supporting that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hayes.
I'm going to agree with Councillor Roberts and Councillor Edwards. I believe with the cost of living being 1.9 and the fact that the adjustment to the assessment is 1.42, I think that 2.9 puts it at a very healthy place, and I would not see any more cuts, and 2.9 I would support.
Okay, anybody else in favor right now just of the 2.9? I've got 3 councillors who are saying yes to that. Councillor Jaglowitz is definitely yes on a 2.9.
2.9.
Sorry, Councillor Hayes, you want to comment something further or no?
No.
Okay, so I've got Councillor Roberts, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Hayes at 2.9. So that's 4 people. So that means 2.9 is not going to pass at this particular point, just so people are aware. So we would have to, even no matter regarding which my vote goes. Councillor Jaglowitz, a comment?
You forgot to include me. I was supporting 2.9.
Yeah, I think I've got you at 2. Yeah, I've got you as one of the 4. Thank you very much. So, so I think we're going to have to try and find a little bit deeper perspective to go, just to understand and make sure everybody is happy along the way. And it is, remember, folks, this is not a personal, we all have our views. We work together as council. And at the end of the day, we are one community and we all need to function and work together to be happy. So I hope, first of all, nobody takes any of these comments personally. Councillor Jaglowitz made that to myself, and I don't take it personally. I appreciate your accounting skills and the insight that you have provided towards this budget along the way. So thank you for that. I think we need to look a little bit deeper. Just a general nod. If 0 is the target, we roughly need to take about $300,000, $350,000 out. And let me actually, for those people who want a 0 target, let me rephrase the question. Do you want a 0 target after growth or before growth? I'll go to Councillor Kelley first of all.
You got me. What are you asking? Sorry.
So if you want a 0 increase in the levy, do you want it to be a 0 before or after assessment growth?
Before.
Okay. Councillor Zavitz, where are you on that topic?
Well, I would say my underlying point here is I would like to see us spend less. And how you want to put that into this equation. To me, the more of less we spend, the better. There's an oxymoron. How about that? So that's where I sit. I just think we, and again, I'm going to chime in on the whole capital thing. And I don't understand why we can't do some sort of a transfer. There are a number of items over there that we haven't discussed that I think just could drop off that list in 1 second, and we're where you talked about getting to for the 0.
Okay, so I'm happy again. We'll have the conversation about capital in a moment. I'll remind the public and council that no matter what we change in a spend level or in this coming year on capital has no impact on today's levy. So we'll deal with that momentarily. Councillor Mazan, where are you at if you want to get to 0, or is it a before or after growth 0?
I think when I had made the comment a reduction, I didn't say 0. I think the rate of inflation is 1.9. Is that correct? So I think we are, if we are in the range of 0 to 2%, then I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to suggest a after growth 0 would certainly get us to that answer. Councillor Bridgman, where are you in the same perspective?
I'm on the after too, so that's
On growth. Councillor Nishikawa, and again, I'm just trying to ask some very specific. If we're trying to get to 0, are you before or after growth?
Before.
You're before. Okay, so we've got a bit of a mixed comment here. We've got a number of people who would say yes. If we add those people, I think there's more people who would say to a 0 before growth. Commissioner Stevens, if we wanted to get to a 0 number after growth, I think we still might need to short reserves a tiny bit at this particular point. And where would that number net out to get to roughly a 0 after growth? Or are we already there?
No, sorry, we weren't. So it's 186,500 would take you to a levy increase of year-over-year levy increase of 1.42, which is the growth. So then you'd have 0. The existing tax base would have a 0 impact. Okay.
So, sorry, that number again was about 180,000?
186, yep.
186. Okay, I'm just going to provide a round number to round that up to 200,000. Just will get us a little below that growth, if that's okay with our council. So if we were to pass the changes financially appropriated here that we have gone through and approved already on Schedule 2, and if we were to reduce our contributions to reserves by $200,000, our tax rate increase before growth would be X. I'm looking to our commissioner for X. Our tax rate after growth would be Y. And what are those numbers? And then what is our official tax rate change?
That was a lot of questions right there. So I would say that the levy to levy change with that $200,000 reduction in reserves, the levy to levy change would be 1.3%.
Okay.
The after growth, that would be negative 0.11.
Okay.
And your tax rate year over year change would be a drop of 2.23%.
Okay. Council dealing with an operating budget right now, and we're going to park this in a moment, but I will ask the question. So I'm pretty sure, because the 4.5% wasn't going to pass, the 2.9% wasn't going to pass. For those people who are coming down right now, are you in favor? And I'll go to Councillor Roberts. I think, would you be in favor of that 1.3% shorting reserves by the $200,000 to get us to our number? Or would you like to go a deeper cut in services?
I want to stay at the 2.9.
Okay, so I appreciate that, but that I don't believe is going to pass at this particular point. So we're trying to figure out where we go. Otherwise, we're at a stalemate and we're not going to move forward.
Let me think about it.
You can think about that. Councillor Mazan, that gets us to a 0%, the 1.3, or actually a negative 0.1% after growth. Are you comfortable with that number?
Yes, I think so. I'm trying to follow these numbers. So I think what is that, the $200,000 that would then be put into reserves?
Or removed from reserves. So where we were in round numbers,
yes.
3.5, we're only going to put 3.3 into reserves. Okay.
Yes. Yes. Thank
So
you.
we would end up with a negative 0.1% after growth. Councillor Edwards, could you buy into that as a principle? I know it's not as deep, it's not where you want, but as a compromise.
No, and that because, you know, we might as well roll dice. Our staff has worked for months on this under very hard circumstances. And for us to say, oh, we'll just take 100 here, 200 there. I think that there should be some tax raise, even if it's 0.5, and that we've got down to $9.11. And as Councillor Roberts said, and that before, I could support that. I would see a little bit of a drop, maybe take 100,000 out, but not 200,000. Sorry.
Okay, so again, I'm going to remind Councillor Evers and Councillor Roberts as I work my way around the room here to understand that Councillor Kelley, Councillor Zavitz, Councillor Nishikawa were at a 0% before growth tax rate. So again, when I've got a 50-50 split, we're not passing any budget, and we can all sit on our 2.5% or 5% desires, but we're going to have to find a common ground as to where to get on this particular one. So I'll leave that for a moment. Councillor Hayes, where are you? Are you okay with an after growth number?
I can't see how you can say zero growth before, because the cost of living is 1.9. So you're actually reducing services by 1.9 if you go with a zero before. However, that being said, I don't want to delay the budget being passed. So if the magic number is $200,000 out of reserves, I will support that vote.
Okay, Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would be willing to look at 100,000 out of reserve if it means that Councillor Edwards could support it. So Commissioner Stevens, could we have a look at that just to keep you busy?
Thank you for that. Councillor Nishikawa, did you want to, I'll go to Commissioner Stevens chimed in.
Well, no, I just, did you want to wait to go through the rest of the group before I look at that one?
I guess I'll let you run that number quickly and I'll go to Councillor Nishikawa. If we got to a 0% after growth, would you be okay to accept a budget of that number right
now? I think I gave you my impression the last time, and I haven't heard that. Basically, I haven't heard from other councillors at all.
Okay, appreciate that. So again, I'm just, as we work our way through this, individually we can say yes and no, but it's going to end up being a majority of council to get us to whatever the number is, and I'm trying to find where we can all potentially accept. So Commissioner Stevens, if we were to remove just 100,000 from reserves, what numbers does this look like? The pre-tax, before tax, after growth, and tax rate?
Right. So the levy increase is 2.14. The impact after growth is 0.71%. And the tax rate, year-over-year tax rate, would drop 1.43%.
Okay. So I'm going to circle back here for a second. And again, if any of the other councillors, Councillor Jaglowitz, want to chime in? Thank you. Haven't heard from you.
Yes, thank you. I listened carefully to my fellow councillors, and as you know, I support where we are right now. If we're going to cut into the reserves, then I would have this simple request. It has to be matched by an equal cut in the capital budget. So let's talk about the 200,000 for a minute. If we put 200,000 less in this year, that means we'll be putting 200,000 in less for the next 10 years. That's $2 million. Yes, that would earn interest, but then things inflate. So I would want to remove a $2 million project. So the 200,000 would equate to 2 million. So I'd want to remove a $2 million project. We just we have one. It's called the Burgess Dam. So if we want to take 200 out of our contribution, let's take the Burgess Dam out of the capital project. If we want to take 350,000 out, then we have to take $3.5 million. So that includes the Bala Bay Bridge. But if you only want to take $100,000 out, well, then let's take out the Morris Bridge. Do you understand? That's how it works. So I'm not going to change. I support the budget where it is today. But if you're going to reduce the contribution, then we should do a corresponding reduction in the capital. If we don't do it today, then hopefully when we get together in a few months to discuss next year's budget and the capital budget, we would have to do that. So that's my position.
Okay, thank you for that. And just a point, and I'll maybe get Commissioner Stevens to comment here, because if I look at our 10-year capital budget plan, this year we were putting in 3.7 million, then 3.6 million. The number varies year to year over the next 10 years. And just because I take $200,000 out this year doesn't mean I need to take 2 million out, because the funding, I believe, is not constant. Is that a fair summary? And I think the other comment, just to understand, you know, our reserves right now, accumulated reserve fund starts in 2020 at $15 million. And at the end of 2029, we're dropping down to $11 million. So we're already almost $4 million short on that. And I will also say that what we've all talked about here, and we've put some money in the budget for, is an asset management plan. And what this council needs to do is strongly look at the items in our 10-year capital forecast down the road many times, that how do we fund 10 community centers? How do we fund 10 fire stations? How do we fund 2 arenas? These are all questions that we as council are going to have to answer, not today. And I think it would be inappropriate for us to try and answer those questions today, but to look at a long-term, a fleet vehicle plan. And that, I think, is the appropriate answer. But just because, and Commissioner, correct me again if I'm wrong, if we take $2,000 or $200,000 out of our capital reserve funding this year, doesn't mean I need to take 2 million out over 10 years. Commissioner?
Yeah, so I think you sort of answered it yourself in your answer that you gave, Mayor Harding, and the reason is that so do they equate? No, but the reality is, if you really, as a council, if you disagree with the infrastructure that's there and that needs to be funded from a rehabilitation perspective, that review is critical. And so if you decide to reduce your number of community centers or fire stations or arenas, all of those sorts of things, if you go about the business of figuring out, and they're tough, these are tough things to decide because it's about your service levels that in your corporation. So if you make those fundamentally tough decisions, at that point you can take a really hard look at how you finance those from a reserve perspective, and you can likely make some reductions in your reserve contributions. Now, I will say at the same time that there's upward pressure, because I know a lot of although a lot of work's been done on the asset management plan, it's not complete yet. And so I know there's feelings like that part has to be finished at the same time to try and influence it. So there could be upward pressure already. But if you make those fundamental choices, then you could reduce reserves. I understand what Councillor Jaglowitz is trying to say from the perspective of, if you reduce 200,000, you should multiply that by 10, because the reality is then you're really, in the 10-year period, you're staying equal from the perspective of, you've taken out 200,000 times 10, so that's $2 million. You've taken out the pressure from the capital side of things. But I think really what council needs to do is that comprehensive review of what assets they want to continue to rehabilitate. And yes, you do as a council have pressure already from the perspective of the fact that your reserves are dropping over that 10-year period. But I think that could be influenced by your asset management plan.
So Julie, let me ask you just a specific question. If we were to reduce the contribution to reserves this year by, let me say, $100,000 or $200,000, as in support of our acting treasurer and yourself as commissioner, would you be throwing a red flag that our council should be extremely worried today? Or can we make it up and put the $200,000 back in next year and be back to sort of normal and then look at our plan? So I guess I'm looking for a little bit of advice. I know it's not an ideal, but in trying to manage COVID times.
Can you do that? Sure, you can.
Okay.
But I will say that you've made some other cuts today that are going to put some pretty significant pressure on next year's budget already. Just the cuts that you've made for just all the various things that we've looked at will put pressure on next year already. So you're going to have a tough budget next year, but.
Okay, understand that. Thank you. Okay, so we have a number right now at $100,000 removing out of reserves, which gets us to a 2.14% increase in the budget and a 0.71% increase after inflation, or not inflation, after market value assessment growth.
After growth, yeah.
After growth, and it works out to a negative tax rate. So I think if I look around the room at people, I get a general, not everybody's happy at the end of the day, and not everyone is going to be happy in this, but I would have to say I could support that budget at 2.14% going forward right now. And we're going to have a conversation about capital, no question, Councillor Jaglowitz. But just as we're not approving everything right now, but generally speaking, I'll go to Councillor Roberts. Could you support that 2.14%, which is the cuts we made this morning? So I get Councillor Roberts saying yes to that. Councillor Mazan. I'm getting a yes from Councillor Mazan. Councillor Kelley, without comment.
I'm going to have to look at it.
Okay, we're going to look at that again. Understand, we're going to make a recommendation today, and we're going to have 2 weeks till we get to council to look at this yet again. So Councillor Edwards, could you support that to move things forward? That's right. We got 3 in favor. Councillor Hayes, could you support that? That's 4 in favor. Councillor Bridgman, That's 5. Councillor Jaglowitz. That's 6. Councillor Zavitz. We're not going to support that. And Councillor Nishikawa. She's down on that. Okay. So I would be in support of that. So we're generally okay. It's a $100,000 reduction in contribution, and I think that would pass going forward. Commissioner Stevens, are you okay with those amendments that we've made today as a recommendation to council going forward right now? And then we'll have a quick conversation about capital.
Sure, I think so. Through you to the clerk, did you want to pass a motion, or do you feel like you've got enough to amend the budget for council's deliberation?
I think we may specifically provide a resolution on this that would be, in my language right now, as directed in this committee of the whole meeting, to remove certain items as an option 2, and then also to reduce contribution to reserves by $100,000 would be our recommendation to council.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, did you want a specific chart that I can send over to Cheryl and for a motion, or is that what the route you want to go? So you've got something really specific?
Yeah, I think that might be inappropriate. And we'll do that, and we'll bring that back from a recess perspective.
Okay.
From a quick comment right now, and from our reserve, sorry, not our reserves, but our capital forecast. Again, we've looked at that. We are utilizing reserves to pay for capital expenditures at this particular point. Going forward, we know that staff have recommended many of these items. I think we believe that the Porter Street Bridge probably won't go forward anyway, so that's going to technically be coming out. But is there anything on the capital side of the equation that we want council to chime in at this particular time? Councillor Jaglowitz, was that your hand up and down? There we go. Councillor Jaglowitz.
Yes, I actually, I'll support the capital budget the way it is for today, as long as there's a commitment to the late summer, early fall as part of the motion coming up, that this will be looked at in detail, department by department, prior to our next budget.
Councillor Jaglowitz, I think you might have to chair that budget committee to have a look at our asset management plan and provide your expertise, if you will, to understand where we go financially going forward. I can't make that recommendation yet. We may bring that forward at a future meeting, but I'd be happy to do that and would appreciate if the clerk would put it in the minutes. Anybody else a comment on the capital at this particular time? Okay, so council, I'm going to suggest that we take a half-an-hour lunch break. We're going to come back with a specific resolution. Actually, I'm going to wait 1 second here. Madam Clerk, I know we're going to lose Councillor Mazan, who will want to vote specifically on this item. And how can what words and language we all know what we've done. We could attach chart 2 to the final motion. I just want to make sure, council, if you can just give us 5 minutes here, we want to put a quick break so that we can get a resolution on the table before Councillor Mazan, because I know she's going to want to vote on this budget. So if we just take a quick 5 and we will come back. So take 5. Okay, sorry. I think we're going to go back. We're going to get rid of our meeting notice. We've got words. Thank you. Actually, I'm glad that Councillor Mazan, that you stayed around for this, because you're actually one of the movers of this motion. So probably a good thing.
Might I say a quick word?
You may.
Just given the times, I did get some questions as to where I might be off to. I'm not leaving my place, but I do think just for a moment, I really appreciate everybody taking this time. As all of you guys know, I have 3 kids who are currently in the high school system or in school system, one of whom is supposed to be graduating this year. So there are schools actually hosting a virtual graduation ceremony at 2 p.m. today. So I did feel like I needed to clarify that I normally wouldn't be leaving one of our meetings, but this one's pretty important because I don't think there's going to be anything else beyond what happens today for this school year. So thank you. And thank you for making that happen.
If he'd like, we could resume and direct our YouTube just to broadcast his graduation if you'd like to.
Oh, that would be, I'm sure he would love that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Council, for this as we've worked our way forward, and thank you, Commissioner Stevens. So I have a resolution moved by Councillor Hayes right now, seconded by Councillor Mazan. Be it resolved that the 2020 report on excluded expenses, Ontario Regulation 28409, regarding expenses excluded from the 2020 draft operating budget and capital budget and forecast, as included in the staff report entitled Draft 2020 Operating and Capital Budget and Forecast, dated April 24th, 2020, be endorsed as amended per the attached Schedule A and forwarded to the Township Council for final approval, and that the Township Muskoka Lakes 2020 draft operating budget and capital budget and forecast attached to the staff report entitled Draft 2020 Operating Capital Budget and Forecast dated April 24, 2020 for the general tax supported services be endorsed and amended and forwarded to Township Council. Final, and again, that is as per schedule. And the schedule as such will be reflective of the discussion we had here. We don't have that to put on the screen. Remember, we will get a copy of this and we'll forward it out to everybody. And we're not approving this. It's just a recommendation to council. So if there happens to be a typo that we catch, we can address it at that particular time. Any questions or comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, all those opposed? Oh, there is Ms. Kelley. Okay, there we go. That motion is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Mazan. Happy graduation to your son. And so Council, I'm going to suggest that we take a quick, let's say, is 25 minutes okay? Because I know you don't have to drive anywhere for lunch. Let's say we'll come back at 2 o'clock, if that's okay, and deal with some of the related, we've got a couple of other items. Or do you want to try and deal with them very quickly? Oh, no, we've also got a closed session item and stuff. So let's come back at 2 o'clock if we may. Okay, thank you all. I'm leaving the meeting. Can I leave the meeting? Yep. Okay, good, done.